Yo, what's up everyone? It's God of Fiction, and today we're checking out, what if Harry audited the Potter-Black-Peverell vaults and found Dumbledore had stolen 2 million galleons. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, Blood and Gold. The Morning Post brought a letter sealed in black wax, and Harry knew before he opened it that something had shifted. He'd been sitting on the edge of his bed in the smallest bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, staring at the wall where he'd pinned a photograph of Sirius. It had been 3 weeks since the Department of Mysteries. 3 weeks of silence from the Order, 3 weeks of Dumbledore's people watching the house from across the street, Mundungus Fletcher today, half asleep behind a hydrangea bush, and 3 weeks of dreams where Sirius fell through that veil over and over and Harry's hand was always 6 inches too short. The owl was a Gringotts eagle owl, enormous and imperious, and it dropped the letter on his lap with the air of a creature that had better things to do. Harry turned the envelope over. Heavy parchment. The Gringotts crest pressed deep into the black wax. His name was written in a script so precise it might have been etched by a blade. Lord Harry James Potter, the smallest bedroom, number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Lord. He cracked the seal. Dear Lord Potter, per the last will and testament of Sirius Orion Black III, filed and activated upon confirmation of death, you are hereby named sole heir and successor to the most ancient and noble house of Black. As this inheritance, combined with your existing status as heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter, constitutes a multi-house lordship claim, Gringotts Wizarding Bank requires your presence for a mandatory heritage audit and lordship assumption ceremony. Failure to appear within 14 days of receipt constitutes forfeiture under Clause 7 of the Goblin Wizard Inheritance Accords of 1403. Your account manager, Griphook, has been assigned to oversee all proceedings. May your gold flow and your enemies bleed. Ragnarok V, Director of Gringotts Wizarding Bank, London Branch. Harry read it twice. Then a third time. He looked at the photograph of Sirius, who grinned and winked at him from the frame. Well, Harry said quietly. I suppose I'd better go find out what you left me. He stood up, pulled on his trainers, and didn't bother telling the Dursleys he was leaving. The night bus was a lurching, violent experience as always, but Harry barely noticed. He sat in the back, the letter folded in his jacket pocket, turning something over in his mind that he couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't grief, exactly, that was a constant hum beneath everything, a bassline to his waking hours. It was something else. A feeling like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground behind you had been crumbling for years and you just hadn't looked down. Dumbledore hadn't written to him. Not once. After everything, the prophecy, Sirius, the battle, silence. And now this letter from the goblins, calling him Lord Potter, as though that meant something no one had ever bothered to tell him. The night bus screeched to a halt outside the Leaky Cauldron at 9:30, and Harry stepped into Diagon Alley under a grey July sky. He'd pulled his fringe down low over his scar out of habit, but he walked with his shoulders back and his jaw set, and something in his stride must have changed, because the usual gawkers seemed to hesitate before approaching and then thought better of it. Gringotts loomed at the end of the alley, white marble and bronze doors, and Harry took the steps 2 at a time. The lobby was cathedral vast and eerily quiet, just the scratch of quills and the distant clinking of gold being weighed. Harry approached the nearest teller, a goblin with half-moon spectacles and a nose like a hatchet blade. Harry Potter, he said. I have an appointment regarding an inheritance claim. My account manager is Griphook. The goblin peered at him for a long moment, then snapped his fingers. A younger goblin materialized from somewhere and led Harry down a corridor he'd never seen before, past the main hall, through a set of iron doors that required a blood sample to open, and into a section of the bank that felt older, quieter, heavier, as though the walls themselves were listening. Griphook's office was at the end of the corridor. The goblin was already standing behind a desk carved from a single piece of black stone, and he watched Harry enter with an expression that was impossible to read. Mr. Potter, Griphook said. Griphook. Sit. Harry sat. The chair was goblin-made, which meant it was uncomfortable in a way that seemed intentional. Griphook remained standing, which, given that standing brought him roughly to Harry's seated eye level, seemed equally intentional. "You received our letter," Griphook said. "I did. It called me Lord Potter. Because that is what you are. Or rather, what you will be, once the ceremony is complete." Griphook opened a leather folder on his desk. "Before we proceed, I must inform you that a multi-house lordship claim triggers an automatic full audit of all associated vaults and accounts. This is not optional. This is goblin law. Fine by me. I didn't even know I had more than one vault." Griphook went very still. "You didn't know?" "No. I've only ever been to my trust vault. Vault 687. Something passed across Griphook's face, something sharp and dangerous. He made a note on the parchment in front of him with a quill that scratched like a knife on bone. "Mr. Potter, let us begin at the beginning. I need you to place 3 drops of blood on this parchment. It will confirm your identity and activate the heritage trace." He produced a ceremonial dagger, short, silver, covered in runes, and a sheet of parchment so white it seemed to glow. Harry took the dagger, pricked his thumb without hesitation, and let 3 drops fall. The parchment drank the blood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then ink began to bloom across the surface, flowing outward from where the blood had landed in an elegant, branching script that wrote itself as Harry watched. Harry James Potter, born, July 31, 1980. Blood status, half-blood father, James Charles Potter, deceased, head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. Mother, Lily Potter née Evans, deceased, inheritances, most ancient and noble house of Potter, by blood, as sole heir most ancient and noble house of Black, by magical will, named heir of Sirius Orion Black. 3 most ancient and noble house of Peverell, by blood, through paternal line, as sole remaining descendant of Ignotus Peverell. Active vaults, 12 properties, 7 Wisengamot seats, 3 current magical guardian, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, contested, see notes. Harry stared at the parchment. 12 vaults. 7 properties. 3 Wisengamot seats. And a magical guardianship he'd never been told about. "What does contested mean?" he asked. Griphook's smile was all teeth. "It means, Mr. Potter, that the audit has already turned up irregularities. Shall we proceed?" "Yes." Griphook snapped his fingers and the black stone desk transformed, the surface rippled and expanded, and stacks of ledgers materialized across it, each one thick as a Bible and bound in leather stamped with different family crests. Potter. Black. Peverell. Griphook opened the Potter ledger first and began turning pages with his long, sharp fingers, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this conversation. "Your trust vault, Vault 687, was established by your parents before their death. It was set to receive an annual deposit of 500 galleons from the main Potter family vault, Vault 712, for the purpose of funding your education and living expenses until you reached majority or claimed your lordship." Griphook looked up. "You were aware of this?" "I knew about the trust vault. I didn't know where the money came from. Vault 712 is the primary Potter vault. As of your parents' death, it contained approximately 4,700,000 galleons in liquid gold, plus investments, properties, and artifacts valued at an additional 2 million. He turned a page. The Black family vault, Vault 711, contains approximately 3 million galleons in liquid gold, though the Black investments are more extensive and the properties more numerous. The Peverell vault, Vault 3, is one of the oldest in Gringotts. Its contents are significant, though primarily in artifacts rather than gold." Harry's head was spinning. He'd spent his childhood in a cupboard under the stairs, wearing Dudley's cast-offs, being told he was a burden. He'd had 10 million galleons sitting in a bank a bus ride away. "Where is the money now?" Harry asked, because something in Griphook's tone had gone hard and flat, like a blade being laid on a table. "Ah," said Griphook. Now we arrive at the reason I requested this meeting be conducted in the secure wing. He turned to a section near the back of the Potter ledger, marked with a red tab. The pages here were different, the ink was darker, the entries more dense, and running down the right margin in goblin script was a series of annotations that Harry couldn't read but that seemed, from Griphook's expression, to be profoundly offensive. Beginning on November 3, 1981, 3 days after your parents' death, a series of withdrawals were initiated from Vault 712. The authorization was signed by Albus Dumbledore, in his capacity as your magical guardian. Harry said nothing. His hands were flat on the arms of the chair. The first withdrawal was 50,000 galleons. The stated purpose was ward maintenance and protective enchantments for the placement of the Potter heir. Subsequent withdrawals followed at regular intervals, monthly, then quarterly, then annually. The amounts varied, but they escalated over time. Griphook turned another page. By 1985, the withdrawals had expanded to include the Potter investment portfolio. Shares in Nimbus Broom Company, Slug and Jigger's Apothecary, and the Daily Prophet were sold or transferred to accounts controlled by Dumbledore or organizations he directed. The proceeds were withdrawn in gold. Harry's voice came out very level. How much? From the Potter vaults alone, over 14 years, 1,437,000 galleons. The number sat in the air between them like a held breath. The black vaults, Griphook continued, turning to the second ledger, were accessed differently. Sirius Black was incarcerated without trial and therefore never officially stripped of his lordship, but Dumbledore petitioned the Wisingamot in a closed session in 1982 for emergency access to the Black accounts, citing war reparations and national security. The petition was granted. Between 1982 and 1995, approximately 710,000 galleons were withdrawn from the Black Vaults under this authorization. Harry did the math. It wasn't difficult. 2.1 million, he said. 2,147,000 galleons, Griphook corrected. Plus an estimated 300,000 in devalued investments and transferred properties. But the gold alone, yes. Over 2 million. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear his own heartbeat, steady and slow, which surprised him. He'd expected rage. He'd expected the wild, thrashing fury that had destroyed Dumbledore's office a month ago. Instead, he felt something colder. Something that settled into his bones like winter and made everything very clear and very still. Where did the money go? Harry asked. Griphook produced another folder, thinner than the ledgers, bound in red. We have traced the funds to several destinations. The Order of the Phoenix received approximately 800,000 galleons over the years, safe houses, equipment, operations. Hogwarts received 300,000 in anonymous donations that were used at the headmaster's discretion. Various political campaigns and Wisingamot initiatives received approximately 400,000. The remainder, roughly 650,000 galleons, was deposited into a personal vault registered to Albus Dumbledore. Personal. Personal. Harry breathed in. He breathed out. You said my magical guardian status was contested. Yes. When your parents died, their will, which was filed with Gringotts and the Ministry, specified that custody should pass first to Sirius Black, then to Alice and Frank Longbottom, then to Amelia Bones. Albus Dumbledore was explicitly excluded as a guardian, both magical and physical. The will states, and I quote, "Under no circumstances shall Albus Dumbledore be granted guardianship of our son or control of our estates. We love and respect the man, but we do not trust his priorities where Harry's welfare is concerned." The words hit Harry somewhere deep, not in the chest but in the stomach, a physical impact that made him grip the arms of the chair. His parents had known. They'd seen something, suspected something, and tried to protect him, and it hadn't mattered, because Dumbledore had done it anyway. Their will was sealed by order of the Chief Warlock, Griphook said. Which was, at the time, Albus Dumbledore. He sealed his own exclusion and appointed himself guardian on the same day. November 1st, 1981. Harry closed his eyes. Behind them, he saw Dumbledore's office, the silver instruments, the warm smile, the offered lemon drops. I cared about you too much, Harry. I acted as I thought best. There's one more thing, Griphook said, and something in his voice made Harry open his eyes, because the goblin sounded almost careful, which was not a quality Harry associated with goblins. On December 24, 1981, Christmas Eve, a magical suppression ward was placed on you. It's tied to your core. The payment for the ward's creation and maintenance was drawn from Vault 712. The ward master was paid annually, a retainer of 5,000 galleons, to keep the ward active and adjusted as your core grew. Harry stared at him. A suppression ward. It limits your magical output to approximately 40% of your natural capacity. Based on the ward schema we've obtained from the payment records, it was designed to keep your power at a level consistent with a talented but not exceptional wizard. Without it. Griphook shrugged, a gesture that on a goblin looked like a minor tectonic event. Without it, you would be something considerably more. Harry stood up. He didn't decide to, his body just moved, carrying him to his feet with a sharp, electric energy that made the air in the room crackle. The candles on Griphook's desk flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling for a moment before settling. Griphook watched him. The goblin hadn't flinched. Can you remove it? Harry asked. Our curse breakers can remove it within the hour. It will be uncomfortable. Remove it. Before we do, I must complete the lordship ceremony. If you accept all three houses, you will have legal standing to pursue every claim, every charge, every demand for restitution. Without the lordship, you are a minor under the guardianship of a man who has stolen from you. With it, you are Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, head of 3 ancient and noble houses, with 3 seats on the Wisingamot and full legal authority over your estates. Then let's do it. Griphook produced 3 ring boxes from a drawer, one of burnished gold, one of dark silver, one of ancient, age-blackened iron. He opened them on the desk. The Potter ring was gold, set with a ruby that caught the light like a living ember. The black ring was silver and onyx, cold even from a distance, radiating old magic like heat from a forge. The Peverell ring was the simplest, a band of pale stone, almost white, etched with a symbol Harry recognized from the tales. The triangle, the circle, the line. Place the Potter ring first, Griphook said. As your blood house, it takes primacy. Harry picked up the Potter ring and slid it onto his right ring finger. The effect was immediate, a warmth that started in his hand and spread up his arm and into his chest, like drinking hot butterbeer on a freezing day. Something clicked, somewhere deep inside him, a lock turning that he hadn't known was there. He felt the ring resize itself to fit perfectly, and with it came a rush of knowing. Not specific knowledge, but a sense of connection, of belonging, of being part of something old and strong that stretched back centuries. The black ring went on his left ring finger, and it was nothing like the Potter ring. It was cold and sharp, and it tested him. He could feel it, a probing intelligence in the metal, ancient magic deciding whether he was worthy. For a moment it tightened painfully, and a dozen whispered voices hissed in his ears in a language he almost understood. Then it settled, and the cold became a different kind of warmth, fierce, protective, proud. The magic of a family that had survived 1,000 years through sheer, vicious refusal to bend. The Peverell ring he saved for last. He picked it up and the room changed, the temperature dropped, the candles dimmed, and for a moment Harry could see, at the edge of his vision, shadows that weren't shadows. Figures. Watching. Waiting. He slid the ring on, and the stone hummed against his skin, and something ancient looked at him from very far away and nodded. The 3 rings glowed, gold, silver, white, and then merged, flowing together on his right hand into a single band that shifted and shimmered, displaying each family's crest in turn before settling into an interlocked design that incorporated all 3. Griphook bowed. It was the first time Harry had ever seen a goblin bow. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Griphook said. Welcome to your inheritance. Harry flexed his hand. The ring felt like it had always been there. Now remove the ward. Griphook led him deeper into the bank, through corridors that grew rougher and older the further they went. The polished marble gave way to hewn stone, then to raw rock, and the air changed from the dry cool of the upper bank to something warmer, earthier, thick with ambient magic. They passed through a chamber where goblin smiths were working metal that glowed blue-white, and another where a dragon was chained. Harry saw it through an archway, vast and breathing fire, and he thought of the Triwizard Tournament and felt nothing but a distant, cold recognition. I've fought worse than dragons. I've fought worse than most people can imagine. The ward-breaking chamber was circular, carved from the living rock, with runes etched into every surface. 3 goblins waited inside, tall for their kind, dressed in leather and covered in runic tattoos. Cursebreakers. They looked at Harry with professional interest. Lie down, the eldest one said, pointing to a stone slab in the center of the room. This will hurt. Harry lay down. The stone was warm, not cold, and it thrummed with a subsonic vibration that he felt in his teeth. The 3 Cursebreakers took positions around him, each at a third of the circle, and began chanting in gobbledygook, low, rhythmic, building. The pain, when it started, came from inside. Not from the Cursebreakers, from the ward itself, fighting to stay in place. It was anchored to his magical core, Griphook had said, and Harry could feel it now, a net, a cage, something woven tight around the center of his magic that had been there so long he'd mistaken it for the boundaries of himself. The goblins' chanting intensified, and the ward began to tear. Harry gripped the edges of the stone slab and didn't scream. He wanted to. The pain was extraordinary, not like the cruciatus, which was all nerve endings and agony, but something deeper, like having a piece of himself ripped away and discovering the piece underneath was vast and bright and furious. The ward came apart in stages, each layer peeling back to reveal more power beneath it, and every time Harry thought it was over, another layer tore free and another surge of magic flooded through him. The candles in the room exploded. Not just the flames, the candles themselves, wax and metal holders and all, detonated outward and then hung in the air, frozen, as Harry's magic caught them without his conscious intention. The runes on the walls blazed white. The stone slab cracked down the middle. The eldest Cursebreaker shouted something in gobbledygook and made a wrenching gesture with both hands, and the last layer of the ward shattered. Harry felt it go, felt it like a chain snapping, like a door being blown off its hinges, and his magic roared through him with a force that lifted him off the slab and held him suspended 3 feet in the air for a full 5 seconds before he managed to pull it back under control and lower himself to the ground. He stood there, breathing hard, his hands shaking. Not from weakness, from the sheer, overwhelming presence of his own power. He'd been operating at 40%. He'd fought Voldemort at 40%. He'd produced a Patronus that drove off 100 Dementors at 40%. He'd fought Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries at 40%. Merlin's teeth, one of the younger Cursebreakers muttered, staring at the cracked slab, the frozen debris, the blazing runes. The eldest one silenced him with a look, but even he was pale beneath his tattoos. Harry turned to Griphook, who was standing in the doorway, watching with an expression of profound satisfaction. How do I feel? Harry said, answering the question before Griphook could ask it. Like I've been breathing through a straw my entire life and someone just ripped it out. Good, Griphook said. Then let us discuss what you intend to do about the man who put it there. They returned to Griphook's office. Harry's magic was settling, finding its new level, and he could feel it. The difference was staggering. It was like the difference between a candle and a bonfire. He could feel the wards of the bank around him, could sense the magic in the walls, in the doors, in the rings on his hand. When he reached for his wand, holly and phoenix feather, it responded so eagerly it shot sparks across the room without him casting a spell. First, Harry said, sitting down again. The chair creaked under the ambient pressure of his magic. He reined it in. I want every account Dumbledore has ever touched frozen. His personal vault, any organizational accounts he controls, anything. Already in progress, Griphook said. The moment the audit confirmed the unauthorized withdrawals, Director Ragnarok ordered a hold on all associated accounts. Dumbledore will discover this the next time he attempts to access his gold, which, based on his patterns, will be within the week. Second. I want copies of everything. Every forged document, every unauthorized withdrawal, every sealed record. I want the evidence organized and ready for legal proceedings. Griphook's teeth gleamed. Our forensic team has been compiling the records since yesterday. We anticipated your request. Third. Harry paused. He was thinking of Sirius. Of his parents' will. Of the cupboard under the stairs. I want my parents' will unsealed. I want it filed with the Wisengamot and published. I want everyone to know that Dumbledore overrode my parents' explicit wishes. That will require a formal petition to the Wisengamot, which you now have the standing to make. Then I'll make it. Harry looked at the red folder, the one that listed where his money had gone. The Order of the Phoenix. 800,000 galleons. Which members knew? Unclear. The funds were channeled through Dumbledore personally. It is possible, even likely, that most members of the Order believed funding came from Dumbledore's own resources or from willing donors. Harry thought of the Weasleys. Of Remus. Of Tonks and Moody and all the others who'd fought and bled for the Order. He didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to destroy the man who'd used them, who'd funded their war with a stolen orphan's gold and let them believe it was generosity. I want to see my properties, Harry said. You said there were 7. Griphook pulled out a map, not a paper map but a magical one that floated above the desk and rotated slowly, showing the British Isles dotted with glowing points. Potter Manor, in the Welsh Marches, sealed by Dumbledore in 1981, supposedly for security. It has house elves maintaining it, they answer to the Potter Lordship ring, so they will respond to you now. There is a London townhouse on Grimmauld Place, you know it as the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. It was a black property and is now yours. A cottage in Godric's Hollow, your parents' home, currently maintained as a memorial. A hunting lodge in Scotland. A villa in the south of France. And 2 properties from the Peverell line, a manor in the West Country and a tower on a small island off the Cornish coast that has been unoccupied for 3 centuries. Harry was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. 7 homes. He'd never had one. Potter Manor, he said. That's where my family lived. For generations. It is extensively warded and, according to our records, contains a significant library, training facilities, and family archives. It was your father's home. Harry's chest ached, but the ache was clean, like a wound that was finally being allowed to heal instead of being constantly reopened. I'll go there today. But first, Grimmauld Place. It's mine now. Fully and completely. As Lord Black, you control all Black properties and can set or revoke access to any of them. The Order is using Grimmauld Place as their headquarters. Yes. Under whose authority? Dumbledore's. He claimed provisional access after Sirius's death, citing wartime necessity. Harry smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile he'd learned from Sirius, sharp and bright and a little bit feral. Revoke it. Revoke all access to Grimmauld Place for anyone not explicitly authorized by me. I want the wards changed, the Fidelius updated with me as secret keeper, and every member of the Order locked out until I personally decide who gets back in. Griphook made a note. It will be done within the hour. The house elf, creature, will answer to you as Lord Black. Good. Now, the Wisengamot seats. How do I claim them? You already have, by accepting the lordship rings. The seats are active. You may attend the next session, which is. Griphook checked a calendar. August 1st. 1 week from now. I'll be there. Griphook set down his quill and looked at Harry with something that, on a human face, might have been respect. On a goblin's face, it was more like the look a swordmaker gives a particularly fine blade. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. I will be frank with you, as is the goblin way. What has been done to you is an offense not only against your houses but against Gringotts. Theft of this magnitude, under our watch, there are goblins who will face consequences for failing to flag these transactions. Director Ragnarok is personally invested in seeing this matter resolved. You will have the full support of Gringotts in your legal proceedings. I appreciate that, Griphook. And I won't forget it. See that you don't. The goblin paused. One more matter. In the records of expenditures from your stolen funds, we found a series of payments to a dealer in rare magical artifacts. The items purchased were unusual, dark, old, and connected to soul magic. The purchases were made by Dumbledore, using your gold, and the records were heavily encrypted. It took our best codebreakers to crack them. Harry leaned forward. Soul magic. I cannot say more without further research. But the pattern is suggestive, and I thought you should know. We will continue to investigate and report our findings. Soul magic. Harry's mind went to the graveyard, to Voldemort's resurrection, to the prophecy. Something nagged at him, a connection he couldn't quite make yet, hovering just out of reach. Keep digging, he said. And Griphook, I want to set up meetings. Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE. And Augusta Longbottom, if she's willing. I need allies who understand the Wizengamot, and I need them before August 1st. I will send the correspondence today. Letters from the Lord of 3 ancient and noble houses tend to receive prompt responses. Harry stood and extended his hand. Griphook looked at it for a moment. Goblins didn't shake hands as a custom, and then reached out and gripped it. The goblin's hand was hard and dry and surprisingly strong. This is going to get ugly, Harry said. Yes, Griphook agreed, and this time his smile was wide enough to show all of his teeth. It is. Harry walked out of Gringotts into afternoon sunlight that felt different on his skin. Everything felt different, the press of his magic against his ribs, the weight of the ring on his hand, the knowledge of what had been done to him settling into a cold, clear certainty that was nothing like the blind rage he'd expected. He stopped on the marble steps and looked out over Diagon Alley. Witches and wizards moved through the street below, shopping, laughing, living their lives under the shadow of a war they half believed in and a leader they trusted completely. In a week, he was going to walk into the Wizengamot and tear that trust apart, and the thought didn't frighten him. It steadied him. He thought about what to do first. He should go to Potter Manor, he wanted to, badly, with an ache that was almost physical. But there was something he needed to do before that. Someone he needed to talk to. Neville Longbottom was an unlikely choice for a first ally, and Harry knew it. Ron was his best friend. Hermione was the smartest person he knew. But Ron's family was deeply entangled with Dumbledore and the Order, and Hermione's instinct when confronted with uncomfortable truths about authority figures was to defend them until the evidence became undeniable. Neither of them would be his first call, not for this. Neville, though. Neville's parents had been tortured into insanity, and Dumbledore had done nothing. Neville's grandmother had tried for years to get Sirius Black a trial. Harry hadn't known that until he'd seen it in the Gringotts records, a letter from Augusta Longbottom demanding due process, filed alongside the Wizengamot minutes where Dumbledore had tabled the motion. The Longbottoms had no love for Dumbledore. And Neville, after the Department of Mysteries, was not the round-faced boy who melted cauldrons in potions. He was someone who'd fought Death Eaters with a broken nose and his father's wand and hadn't backed down. Harry sent a message via Gringotts courier, faster than owl post and impossible to intercept, and then apparat. He hadn't meant to apparate. He didn't have a license, had never been taught, and the ministry traced underage magic. But his magic was different now, vast and responsive, and when he thought about where he wanted to be, it simply took him there. The sensation was nothing like what he'd heard described, no squeezing, no discomfort. Just a step through folded space, silent and smooth, and then he was standing on a country lane in Lancashire, looking at the gates of Longbottom Hall. He looked down at his hands. No splinching. Not even a wobble. "Ha," he said, and filed that away under things to explore later. Longbottom Hall was a solid, unpretentious manor house of grey stone, nothing like the grandeur Harry expected from an ancient and noble house. It looked like the kind of house that had weathered centuries of English weather and was prepared to weather several more. The wards prickled against his skin as he approached the gate, and then recognized the lordship rings and parted like curtains. Augusta Longbottom was waiting in the doorway before he reached the front steps. She was tall, sharp-eyed, wearing her trademark vulture hat, and she looked at Harry with an expression of frank assessment that reminded him powerfully of McGonagall. "Lord Potter-Black-Peverell," she said. "I received Gringotts' message. You move fast." "I've lost enough time, Lady Longbottom." Something flickered in her eyes, approval, maybe. She stepped aside. "Come in. Neville's in the greenhouse, but I've sent for him. Tea. Please." The sitting room was warm and cluttered with the comfortable mess of a lived-in home, stacks of herbology journals on the side tables, a toad dozing on a cushion by the fire, an enchanted knitting project clicking away in the corner. Augusta poured tea with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd hosted Wizengamot members and war heroes and didn't see much difference between the two. "You're here about Dumbledore," she said. It wasn't a question. Harry set down his cup. "What do you know?" "I know that Sirius Black never received a trial, and that every motion I filed was blocked by the Chief Warlock. I know that the Potter will was sealed under highly irregular circumstances. I know that my son's godfather rotted in Azkaban for 12 years while the man who put him there offered me lemon drops and assured me justice would be served in its own time." Augusta's voice was controlled and precise and absolutely furious. "What I don't know are the specifics. But I suspect you're about to tell me." Harry told her. He laid out the audit, the theft, the forged guardianship, the sealed will, the magical suppression ward, all of it. Augusta listened without interrupting, her tea going cold in her hands, and when he finished, she set the cup down with a sharp click against the saucer. 2 million galleons, she said. 2.1. And the suppression ward. Placed on a child. Her nostrils flared. "I'll have his head on a pike." "I'd prefer to have it legally," Harry said. "But I'm not opposed to pikes as a backup." The ghost of a smile crossed Augusta's face. "You don't sound like the boy Neville described from school." "I'm not." Neville arrived then, slightly out of breath, dirt on his hands and a pair of pruning shears still clutched in one fist. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Harry, and his eyes went wide, not at the lordship ring or the new set of Harry's jaw, but at something less visible. The magic, maybe. Harry was still learning to contain it, and in an enclosed space it tended to press outward, filling the room with a subtle pressure that sensitive wizards could feel. "Harry," Neville said. "You feel different." "I am different." "Sit down, Nevada. I need your help, and I need to tell you why." He told the story again. Neville's reaction was quieter than his grandmother's, no fury, no outrage, just a slow, steady tightening of his jaw and a look in his eyes that Harry recognized from the Department of Mysteries. The look of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be moved from it. "What do you need?" Neville asked when Harry finished. "I need someone who understands Wizengamot politics. I need someone who can help me identify allies and enemies in that chamber. I need someone who'll stand with me on August 1st when I walk in there and burn down 15 years of Dumbledore's careful construction." "You'll have the Longbottom vote," Augusta said immediately. "And our guidance. Neville has been sitting in on sessions since he was 14, at my insistence. He knows the players." Neville nodded slowly. "The traditionalist faction will back you, they've resented Dumbledore's influence for years. The Bones family will listen, especially if Amelia sees the evidence. The Greengrass family is neutral but influential, Cyrus Greengrass is a pragmatist who follows the gold. Show him Dumbledore's been playing games with ancient house wealth and he'll turn. Harry raised an eyebrow. You've been paying attention. Gran didn't give me a choice. Neville almost smiled. But Harry, you know this won't just be a political fight. Dumbledore won't sit still while you dismantle his power base. He'll come at you. Probably not directly, that's not his style. He'll use people. Guilt. The war. He'll say you're endangering the fight against Voldemort. Let him, Harry said, and the air in the room thickened for a moment, the windows rattling in their frames. He pulled his magic back. Sorry. Still getting used to it. Augusta was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. The suppression ward, she said slowly. It was limiting you to 40%. That's what the goblin said. And you fought off 100 Dementors at 13. At 40%. Yes. Augusta exchanged a look with Neville. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, she said, I believe this is going to be a very entertaining session of the Wizengamot. Harry left Longbottom Hall as the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the Lancashire countryside in shades of gold and copper. He had allies now, real ones, with political weight and personal motivation and no illusions about Albus Dumbledore. Augusta had promised to begin quiet conversations with sympathetic families. Neville had pulled out a hand-drawn map of the Wizengamot seating chart and walked Harry through every faction, every alliance, every old grudge and outstanding favor, with a strategic fluency that would have stunned anyone who still thought of him as the boy who couldn't cast a proper spell. Harry operated again, this time intentionally, to the coordinates Grip Hook had given him for Potter Manor. He arrived on a hilltop in Wales, the wind in his hair and the valley spread below him like something from a painting, and at the bottom of the valley, half hidden by ancient oaks and shimmering behind wards that sang to the rings on his hand, was the house where his father had grown up. It was beautiful. Not grand in the Malfoy sense, no peacocks, no ostentation, but solid, built from warm honey-colored stone with mullioned windows and climbing roses and a tower at the east end that caught the last of the sunlight. Smoke was rising from one of the chimneys, and as Harry walked down the hill, the front door opened and a house elf stepped out. Ancient, small even by elf standards, with enormous grey eyes that filled with tears the moment they landed on Harry. Master Harry, the elf whispered. Mipsy has waited. Mipsy has kept the house ready. Mipsy knew you would come. Harry knelt so he was at eye level with the elf. Hello, Mipsy. I'm sorry it took so long. The elf threw herself at him with a wail that was half grief and half joy, and Harry held her, this tiny creature who'd kept his family's home alive for 15 years on nothing but faith, and something in his chest finally loosened. He stood in the entrance hall of Potter Manor and felt the wards wrap around him, not like Gringotts wards, impersonal and iron-hard, but warm, familial, welcoming. The house knew him. The magic in its walls was Potter magic, and it responded to the ring on his hand and the blood in his veins and it said home, home, your home. The entrance hall was wide and bright, with a staircase curving upward and portraits lining the walls, Potters going back centuries, all of them turning to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to delight. A man who looked strikingly like Harry, same messy black hair, same build, but with brown eyes instead of green, stepped to the front of his frame and said, well, it's about bloody time. You look like James. Charles Potter. Harry guessed. Your grandfather. And you're the one who's going to make Dumbledore regret the day he touched our gold, if what Mipsy's told me is right. I am. Charles Potter's portrait grinned. There's a war room in the basement and a training hall on the 3rd floor. Your grandmother stocked the library with everything the Potters have collected for 600 years. And there's a letter from your father in the master study, he left it under a Fidelius charm keyed to the lordship ring. We couldn't read it. Couldn't even see it. But we knew it was there. Harry's breath caught. A letter from my dad. Go. Read it. We'll be here when you're done. He found the study on the 2nd floor, a room that smelled of leather and parchment and old magic, with a desk by the window that overlooked the valley. The moment he entered, the Fidelius dissolved around a sealed envelope on the desk, the parchment flickering into visibility like a candle being lit. His father's handwriting. Messy, energetic, achingly familiar from the Marauder's map. Harry, if you're reading this, your mother and I are dead and you've claimed the lordship. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry we weren't there. I'm sorry for whatever you've been through to get to this point. I need to tell you something about Dumbledore. Your mother and I have come to believe that he sees people as pieces on a board. He's not evil, I want to be clear about that, but he is willing to sacrifice anyone, including himself, in pursuit of what he believes is the greater good. We've seen him make choices that terrified us. We've seen him look at you, at a baby, with the eyes of a general assessing a weapon. We've excluded him from your guardianship. If he's found a way around that, then I was right to worry, and you need to protect yourself. Trust the goblins, they have no love for Dumbledore and their forensic magic is better than anything the Ministry can do. Trust Augusta Longbottom, she's the sharpest political mind in the Wizengamot and she's been a friend to us. Trust Sirius, if he's able. The Potter Library has books on topics Hogwarts will never teach you. The training hall will respond to your magical level and scale its challenges accordingly. You are a Potter, Harry. We are an old family and a powerful one, and whatever they've told you about yourself, you are more. I love you. Your mother loves you. We are so proud of you, whatever you've become. Dad, P.S., your mother insists I add, do your homework, eat properly, and for the love of Merlin, comb your hair. She's laughing as she says it. We're happy tonight, Harry. Remember that. Whatever comes next, we were happy. Harry sat in his father's chair, in his father's study, in the house where his father had been a boy, and he cried. Not the helpless, frustrated tears of the past weeks, this was grief given room to breathe, finally, grief with a foundation beneath it instead of an endless falling. He cried for his parents and for Sirius and for the childhood he should have had in this house with these people, and he cried for the boy who'd slept in a cupboard and never known that any of this existed. And when he was done, he wiped his face, folded the letter carefully, and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, next to his heart. He stood at the window of Potter Manor and looked out over the valley. The sun had set and the stars were coming out, one by one, and the wards hummed around him, and his magic was vast and free and his own. Dumbledore had stolen his gold. His heritage. His parents' wishes. His childhood. His power. All of it taken quietly, carefully, with the patient precision of a man who believed he had the right because he believed he knew best. Harry thought of the Wizengamot session on August 1st. He thought of the evidence locked in Gringotts vaults, of the allies already moving into position, of the Goblin Nation's cold fury and Augusta Longbottom's sharp mind and Neville's quiet, unshakable loyalty. He thought of his father's letter. You are more. He was more. And in 1 week, the wizarding world was going to find out exactly how much more. Harry placed his hand against the window glass and felt Potter Manor pulse beneath his fingers, alive and waiting and ready. I'm home, he said. The wards sang in answer. Chapter 2, The Weight of Rings. Potter Manor woke Harry at dawn. Not with an alarm or a spell, the house itself seemed to shift, light pouring through the master bedroom windows at an angle that found his face with surgical precision, and the wards hummed a low note that vibrated through the mattress and into his bones. It was, Harry reflected as he opened his eyes to a ceiling painted with moving constellations, the politest way anyone had ever told him to get out of bed. He'd slept in the master suite. Mipsy had offered him his father's childhood room, but something about the lordship rings, or maybe just something about Harry, had refused. He was Lord Potter now. He'd sleep where the lord of the house slept. The bed was massive, four-posted, draped in deep red hangings, and the mattress was so comfortable that for the first time in weeks, he hadn't dreamed of the veil. He lay there for a moment, feeling his magic. It was still strange, like having worn shoes 2 sizes too small your entire life and suddenly going barefoot. Everything was more. He could feel the wards of the manor layered around him, dozens of them, old and intricate and strong. He could feel Mipsy downstairs in the kitchen, her small magical signature bustling with purpose. He could feel the portraits stirring in their frames throughout the house, the enchanted armor in the entrance hall shifting on its feet, the training hall on the 3rd floor pulsing with latent energy, waiting. He got up, showered in a bathroom with enchanted plumbing that adjusted temperature by thought, and dressed in clothes he'd found in the master wardrobe, his father's clothes, preserved by house elf magic, and they fit him almost perfectly. James Potter had been slightly broader in the shoulders, but Harry was still filling out and the difference was minor. He chose dark trousers, a white shirt, and a jacket of deep charcoal that had a subtle shimmer of protective enchantments woven into the fabric. Proper wizard wear. Not robes, the Potters had apparently favored a more practical style. He looked at himself in the mirror. The reflection that looked back was someone he almost didn't recognize. Not because of the clothes or the ring or even the power, but because of the eyes. The perpetual anxiety, the hunted look he'd carried since he was 11, was gone. In its place was something steady and sharp and completely unafraid. "You look like your father," the mirror said. "But you've got your mother's look about you when you set your jaw like that. She used to terrify people with that look." "Good," Harry said. Mipsy had prepared a breakfast that could have fed a small army: eggs, bacon, toast, kippers, sausages, fruit, porridge, and a pot of tea strong enough to strip paint. Harry sat at the kitchen table rather than the dining room, and Mipsy hovered nearby, wringing her hands with anxious joy every time he took a bite. "Mipsy," Harry said between mouthfuls, "I need to know everything about this house. The library, the training hall, anything my family kept here that Dumbledore might not want me to find." Mipsy's ears flattened. "The bad wizard. Mipsy knows about the bad wizard. He came once, after Master James and Mistress Lily died. He put ceilings on the house, big magic, very strong. He told Mipsy the house was closed forever, that no one would come. But Mipsy is bound to the Potter blood, not to the bad wizard, and Mipsy kept the house alive." She drew herself up to her full height, which was roughly that of a large cat. "Mipsy did not listen to the bad wizard." "You did brilliantly, Mipsy. What did he seal?" "The library, the training hall, the war room, and the family vault beneath the house. Mipsy could not enter these rooms. But when Master Harry put on the ring, the ceilings broke. Mipsy heard them break, like ice cracking." Harry finished his breakfast, thanked Mipsy in a way that made her burst into tears of happiness, and went to explore his house. The library was on the 1st floor, behind a set of double doors carved with the Potter crest. When Harry pushed them open, the smell hit him first: parchment and leather and old magic, the scent of centuries of accumulated knowledge. The room was enormous, stretching back further than the exterior of the house should have allowed, shelves reaching from floor to vaulted ceiling, every inch filled with books. Enchanted ladders stood at intervals, ready to climb to any shelf at a word. A massive desk occupied the center of the room, and above it, a chandelier of floating candles cast warm, steady light. Harry walked the aisles slowly. The books were organized by subject, and the subjects were extraordinary. There were entire sections on ward magic, battle magic, healing, enchanting, alchemy, magical theory, and, Harry stopped, a section labeled in his grandfather's handwriting: restricted, combat arts, classified ministry techniques, and forbidden applications. The shelves here were behind a shimmer of protective magic that dissolved at his touch. He pulled out a book at random. The Art of Magical War, Tactics and Techniques of the Hit Wizard Corps, 1940 to 1945. His grandfather Charles had been a war hero, he remembered from the heritage parchment. The book fell open to a chapter on chain casting, the technique of linking spells together in rapid sequence so that one spell's energy fed the next, allowing a skilled wizard to cast dozens of spells in the time it normally took to cast 3 or 4. Harry's fingers itched. He wanted to train. He wanted to feel what his magic could do now, unshackled and full. But first, the war room. It was in the basement, as Charles's portrait had said. Harry descended a stone staircase behind a concealed door in the entrance hall, the rings on his hand glowing faintly to light his way. The war room was a circular chamber, smaller than the library but dense with magic. A round table of dark wood occupied the center, its surface etched with a map of Britain that moved and shifted, showing magical population centers, ley lines, and, Harry leaned closer, the locations of active dark magic. Small red dots pulsed in various locations, and one large, angry cluster throbbed somewhere in the north. The map updates based on ambient magical resonance. Charles's voice came from a small portrait mounted on the wall. Your great-grandmother designed it during the Grindelwald War. The red dots are concentrations of dark magic, curses, wards, artifacts, dark creatures. That big cluster in the north is probably Voldemort's base of operations, or close to it. Harry stared at the map. He'd spent years fumbling in the dark, relying on Dumbledore's carefully rationed information. And here, in his own basement, was a tool that showed him the entire magical landscape of Britain. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Because Dumbledore sealed the house, Charles said. And because the only people who knew about the war room's capabilities were Potters. Your father used it during the First War. He and Lily and their friends would gather here, planning missions that Dumbledore didn't always know about. Your father didn't fully trust the old man even then, not after some of the things he'd seen. Harry filed that away. What else is down here? Armory. Next room over. And beneath that, the family vault, not the Gringotts vaults, but the house vault. Potters always kept their most important possessions at home, not in a bank. Old family habit from before Gringotts existed. The armory was exactly what it sounded like. Racks of weapons, swords, knives, staves, all goblin-made and humming with enchantments. Dueling robes enchanted with protections that made Harry's current jacket look like tissue paper. And wands. Dozens of them, in glass cases along the walls, each labeled with the name of the Potter who'd wielded it. Harry stopped in front of one case. The label read, Fleamont Potter, Holly, 11 inches, Phoenix Feather. His great-grandfather's wand. The same wood and core as his own. Phoenix Feather cores run in the family, Charles observed. Potters have an affinity with them. Something about the way our magic resonates, fire and rebirth and all that. Your wand is Holly and Phoenix Feather too, isn't it? Yes. And it's the brother wand to Voldemort's. Charles was quiet for a moment. Well. That's either a coincidence or fate, and in my experience, coincidences are just fate with better PR. Harry laughed, actually laughed, surprised by it, and the sound echoed off the stone walls of the armory and felt good. Real. The family vault was the last room, the deepest, accessible only by placing his ring hand against a stone door that recognized the Potter crest. Inside, it was small, just a chamber of rough stone, with shelves carved into the walls. But the items on those shelves radiated magic so powerful that Harry's enhanced senses reeled. A pensieve of white stone, ancient and cracked, that showed scenes from Potter history when he looked into it. A set of journals bound in dragon hide, written in a cipher he couldn't read yet but that the rings told him he could learn. A sword, not goblin-made, something older, its blade etched with runes that shifted and changed. And a cloak, folded neatly on the highest shelf, that Harry recognized immediately. That's not, he reached for it. It was the same material as his invisibility cloak, the same fluid, liquid shimmer. But this one was different, heavier, and when he unfolded it, it was longer, wider, and the magic it radiated was not just concealment but protection. Deep, ancient protection that made the air in the vault hum. The original Peverell cloak, Charles said from a tiny portrait Harry hadn't noticed near the door. The one you have, the invisibility cloak, is a fragment. A piece that was separated from the whole centuries ago. The original does everything yours does and considerably more. It can turn aside spells, hide from magical detection, even protect against certain killing curses, though I'd not recommend testing that casually. Harry held the cloak and felt the Peverell ring pulse on his hand in recognition. 3 rings. 3 houses. And now, in this vault, the artifacts to match. He spent the rest of the morning in the training hall. The room was vast, taking up the entire 3rd floor, with vaulted ceilings high enough to fly in and a floor of smooth stone that absorbed impact. The moment Harry entered, the room came alive, training dummies materialized, targets appeared on the walls, and a ribbon of golden text scrolled through the air, "Welcome, Lord Potter." Training level assessed. Adjusting parameters. The first dummy attacked without warning. Harry's wand was in his hand before he consciously reached for it, and the stunner he fired was so powerful it didn't just knock the dummy back, it disintegrated it. Sawdust and enchanted cloth rained across the floor. Harry stared at his wand. That was a basic stunner. The training hall responded by sending 3 dummies at once, faster this time, casting simulated spells that stung like bees when they hit. Harry dodged the first, shielded the second, and hit all 3 with a sweeping bombarda that he'd intended to be moderate and which blew a crater in the stone floor. He was going to need to recalibrate everything. Every spell he'd ever learned had been cast at 40% power. Now, at full capacity, even his basic spells hit with the force of advanced combat magic. He needed control before he needed new spells. He spent 2 hours on control alone, casting stunners at specific power levels, learning to modulate his output like adjusting the flow from a tap. It was surprisingly intuitive once he understood the principle. His magic wanted to respond to his intent. At 40%, he'd had to force everything, push against the suppression ward like running through water. Now, the magic flowed, and directing it was less like wrestling a fire hose and more like conducting an orchestra. By noon, he'd moved on to the combat books from the library. Chain casting came naturally, his magic's newfound fluidity made the technique almost instinctive, linking spell to spell in fluid sequences that the training dummies couldn't keep up with. He worked through shield variations, curse deflection, apparition in combat. The training hall had anti-apparition wards that could be adjusted, letting him practice short-range jumps while fighting, and a technique from his grandfather's era called flash casting, casting without verbal or wand components, through pure will. The first time he managed it, a wordless, wandless lumos that filled the entire training hall with blinding light, he stood there, breathing hard, sweat dripping, and grinned like a maniac. By the time Mipsy appeared with lunch, brought directly to the training hall on a floating tray, because the elf had apparently decided that Harry's eating schedule was her personal responsibility, he'd been training for 4 hours and felt like he'd lived a lifetime. His body was tired but his magic was singing, and he understood something fundamental that he hadn't before: he wasn't just powerful. He was adaptable. His magic responded to his creativity, his instincts, his emotional state. The more freely he used it, the more it offered. He ate lunch sitting on the training hall floor, cross-legged, with the chain-casting manual open beside him and sweat cooling on his skin, and he felt alive in a way he couldn't remember feeling since, maybe ever. A Gringotts owl arrived at 2 o'clock, while Harry was in the shower. Mipsy brought it to him wrapped in a towel, the letter, not the owl, though knowing Mipsy, she'd probably tried, and Harry opened it standing in the master bathroom with water dripping from his hair. 2 messages. The first was from Griphook: Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Amelia Bones has agreed to meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m., at a neutral location of your choosing. She expressed considerable interest in your evidence of financial irregularities within the Wisengamot. Additionally, our forensic team has completed the first phase of the artifact investigation. The items purchased with your funds are consistent with research into Horcruxes, a form of soul magic so dark that Gringotts records contain only 3 other references in 700 years. Director Ragnarok requests a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the implications. Lastly, Albus Dumbledore attempted to access his personal vault this morning. He was denied. His reaction was instructive. The second message was from Neville. Harry, Gran started making calls. The Bones family is interested, the Abbotts are sympathetic, and the Greengrass family wants to talk. Specifically, Daphne Greengrass reached out to me directly. She says she has information about Dumbledore's financial dealings that she'll only share with you in person. I don't know what to make of her, she's sharp and I've never been able to read her, but she seemed genuine. She wants to meet tomorrow. Let me know. Neville P.S. I've been practicing dueling in the greenhouse. Don't laugh. The plants help. Harry smiled at the postscript and then reread the bit about Horcruxes. The word was unfamiliar but the description, soul magic, resonated with something Dumbledore had been circling around all year, hadn't he? The private lessons that never happened, the hints about Voldemort's past, the obsession with memory and identity. Dumbledore knew something about how Voldemort had survived the Killing Curse's rebound. And he'd used Harry's gold to research it, rather than sharing the information with the person it mattered most to. Harry wrote 2 replies. To Griphook, meet me at Potter Manor tomorrow afternoon. Bring everything you have on the Horcruxes. To Neville, set up the meeting with Greengrass. Tomorrow, after my meeting with Bones. And don't let anyone laugh at greenhouse dueling, I once fought a basilisk at 12, and I guarantee that was less dignified. He sent the owl off and went back to the library. The section on soul magic was thin, only 3 books, and one of them was so dark that it tried to bite him when he picked it up. But the second book, a treatise by a Potter ancestor who'd been an unspeakable in the 1700s, contained a chapter on Horcruxes that made Harry sit down very slowly. A Horcrux was a vessel for a fragment of soul, created by the act of murder. The creation process tore the killer's soul and allowed the fragment to be anchored in an object, tethering the creator to life even if their body was destroyed. It was, the book noted with clinical understatement, the foulest act of magical perversion known to wizard kind. Harry read the chapter twice. Then he sat back and thought. Voldemort had survived the Killing Curse rebounding on him in 1981. His body was destroyed but he persisted, as a wraith, a shade, something less than ghost but more than nothing. He'd needed Quirrell's body, then the ritual in the graveyard, to regain physical form. That was consistent with someone who'd made a Horcrux. But Dumbledore had been researching this for years, spending Harry's money on it, and hadn't told Harry a word. And the diary. Tom Riddle's diary, which Harry had destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets. The way it had behaved, a piece of Voldemort's personality, his memories, his power, contained in an object. Bleeding ink like blood when Harry stabbed it. Screaming. That was a Horcrux, Harry said aloud, and the realization was like a key turning in a lock that opened a dozen more doors. If the diary was a Horcrux, and Dumbledore had been researching Horcruxes, then the question was, how many had Voldemort made? One wouldn't have been enough, one wouldn't have required years of research and hundreds of thousands of galleons in stolen gold to investigate. He thought of his scar. Of the connection to Voldemort. Of the Parseltongue and the shared visions and the way Voldemort's emotions bled into his. He thought about it for a very long time, and then he put the book away and went to train some more, because the alternative was sitting in the dark with that thought and he wasn't ready for that yet. The next morning Harry dressed with care. Not vanity, strategy. He chose the best of his father's clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, a waistcoat of deep green that brought out his eyes, and the charcoal jacket with the protective enchantments. The lordship ring gleamed on his hand, cycling through its 3 crests. He looked, he realized, like what he was, the head of 3 ancient and noble houses, young and powerful and not remotely interested in being underestimated. He apparat to the meeting point for Amelia Bones, a private room at the Leaky Cauldron, warded by Gringotts for the occasion. He arrived early. The room was small, clean, with a round table and 4 chairs and privacy wards that pressed against his senses like cotton wool. Amelia Bones arrived exactly on time. She was a square-jawed, formidable woman with a monocle and an air of compressed authority, and she looked at Harry with the assessing gaze of someone who evaluated people for a living and rarely liked what she saw. Her niece Susan had been in the DA. Harry had always liked Susan. He hoped the aunt was as fair as the niece was kind. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Amelia said, taking a seat. I'll admit, when I received a meeting request from a 16-year-old claiming 3 lordships, I was skeptical. Then I verified the claim with Gringotts and decided I was curious instead. Madam Bones. Thank you for coming. Don't thank me yet. I'm here because you mentioned financial irregularities involving a sitting member of the Wisengamot. That's DMLE jurisdiction. But I'm also here because I respected your parents, and because I've had my own questions about certain decisions made by the Chief Warlock over the years. She folded her hands on the table. So. Show me what you have. Harry opened the folder Griphook had prepared, a comprehensive, meticulously documented record of every unauthorized transaction, every forged signature, every sealed document. Goblin accounting was ruthless in its precision. Every canute was tracked, every transfer dated, every authorization examined and found fraudulent. Amelia read in silence. She was fast, her eyes moved down each page with the trained speed of someone who'd read thousands of case files, but she slowed at certain points. The sealed will. The suppression ward. The personal vault deposits. When she reached the page that showed 650,000 galleons in Dumbledore's private account, her monocle actually fell out. She caught it, replaced it, and kept reading. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at Harry for a long moment. "This is extraordinary," she said, and her voice was controlled but her hands were tight on the table's edge. "Lord Potter, I want to be very clear about what you're alleging. You're saying that the Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, the Supreme Mugwump of the ICW, and the Headmaster of Hogwarts, the most respected wizard in Britain, stole over 2 million galleons from an orphan child, overrode that child's parents' will, and placed a magical suppression ward on a minor. Deliberately. Over a period of 15 years. I'm not alleging it. The goblins have documented it. Every transaction is traced, every forged signature analyzed, every sealed record identified. This isn't an allegation, Madam Bones. It's a case." Amelia leaned back. "You understand that if you bring this before the Wisengamot, it will be the most explosive session in a generation. Dumbledore has allies, powerful ones. He'll fight this with everything he has. I know. And you understand that we're in the middle of a war. That some will argue this destabilizes the fight against Voldemort. I understand that the man who's supposedly leading that fight has been stealing from me since I was a baby and limiting my power to keep me under his control. If that's the leadership the war effort depends on, we were already in trouble." A ghost of something, was it a smile? Crossed Amelia's face. "You're not what I expected, Lord Potter. I keep hearing that. Very well. Here's what I can do. As head of the DMLE, I can open a formal investigation based on this evidence. That gives us subpoena power, we can compel Dumbledore to answer questions under oath and we can access ministry records that might corroborate the Gringotts' findings. I can also assign Aurors to protect you if necessary. I appreciate that, but I can protect myself. I'm sure you believe that. Madam Bones." Harry held up his hand and, without reaching for his wand, conjured a ball of blue-white fire that hovered above his palm, casting sharp shadows across the room. It wasn't a spell he'd learned, it was pure magic, shaped by will, and it burned with a heat that made the privacy wards hum in protest. He held it for 3 seconds, then closed his fist and it vanished. "I can protect myself." Amelia stared at his hand, then at his face. The monocle stayed in place this time, but only just. "The suppression ward. You've had it removed. Yesterday. And you could do that, at full power?" "That was restrained." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'll open the investigation today. The Wisengamot session is on August 1st, that gives us 5 days to prepare. I'll need you to file the formal charges in person. Can you be at the ministry tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there." Bring those Gringotts documents. And Lord Potter, be careful. Not of Dumbledore, since you seem determined not to worry about him. Be careful of the people around him. The Order of the Phoenix isn't just a resistance group, it's a network of the most capable witches and wizards in Britain, and their loyalty to Dumbledore is deep. Some of them will not react well to this. Harry thought of the Weasleys. Of Remus. Of Hermione. I know. I'll be careful with them if they're careful with me. Amelia stood, tucked the folder under her arm, and offered her hand. Harry shook it. Her grip was firm and her eyes were sharp, and he thought, yes. This one I can trust. She left, and Harry sat alone in the warded room for 5 minutes, organizing his thoughts. Then he went to meet Daphne Greengrass. Neville had arranged the meeting at Fortescue's, which had recently reopened under new management. It was public enough to be safe, casual enough to not attract attention, and the ice cream was excellent, which Neville had mentioned as if it were a relevant strategic consideration. Harry had not argued. The ice cream was excellent. He spotted Neville first, sitting at an outdoor table with 2 sundaes already ordered, and across from him, Daphne Greengrass. Harry had seen her at Hogwarts, of course. 5 years of shared classes, though they'd never spoken beyond basic classroom interactions. She was a Slytherin, which in Harry's experience meant either outright hostility or careful neutrality, and Daphne had always been the latter, present, observant, saying nothing. He knew she was considered beautiful, in an ice queen sort of way that intimidated most of the boys in their year, and he knew she was consistently near the top of their class, and beyond that he knew nothing at all. In person, up close, she was, well. The Ice Queen assessment wasn't wrong. She had dark blonde hair pulled back from a face that was all clean lines and sharp angles, blue eyes that evaluated him with a frankness that was almost aggressive, and a posture that said I am exactly where I choose to be and nowhere else. She was wearing Muggle clothes, dark jeans, a fitted blouse, boots, which surprised him. Most pureblood Slytherins wouldn't be caught dead. Potter, she said. Greengrass. Or should I say Lord Potter-Black-Peverell? That's quite a mouthful. Do you hyphenate? Only on formal occasions. Harry's fine. Then Daphne's fine. She picked up her spoon and took a bite of ice cream with the air of someone conducting a negotiation. Sit down. I have things to tell you and I'd rather not have this conversation with you looming. Harry sat. Neville pushed a sundae toward him and gave him a look that said she's been like this the whole time. Neville said you have information about Dumbledore's finances, Harry said. I do. But first, I want to know what you're planning. Not the broad strokes, Neville's filled me in on the theft and the Wisengamot charges. I want to know your endgame. Are you trying to embarrass him? Bankrupt him? Remove him from power? What? Harry met her eyes. They were remarkably steady. All of the above. He stole from me, sealed my parents' will, suppressed my magic, and put me in an abusive home for 15 years. I'm going to take back everything he took, expose what he did, and strip him of every position of authority he holds. And then I'm going to win this war without him. Daphne studied him for a long moment, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Then she set it down. Good. Then we want the same thing. Why? Because Dumbledore did it to other families too. Harry went still. Beside him, Neville leaned forward. My father, Cyrus Greengrass, is the head of a neutral family. We didn't fight in the First War. We didn't join Voldemort and we didn't join Dumbledore, because my grandfather looked at both sides and decided they were both led by men who'd sacrifice anyone to win. For that, Dumbledore punished us. Daphne's voice was even, controlled, but her eyes were bright with old anger. Not obviously. Not in any way we could prove. But over the years, Greengrass business interests were mysteriously blocked. Ministry contracts were awarded to competitors. Licensing applications were delayed, denied, lost. My father estimated the damage at about 300,000 galleons in lost revenue over 20 years. He couldn't prove it was Dumbledore. He could prove the pattern. He couldn't prove the hand behind it, because Dumbledore never does anything himself. He has people. Loyal people in every department of the ministry who do small favors without asking why, because Dumbledore asked them nicely and they trust him. She picked her spoon back up. But when Neville told me about the Gringotts audit, I realized, if Dumbledore's financial dealings are exposed, it might shake loose enough evidence to prove what he did to the neutral families too. There are at least 4 other houses with similar stories. The Zabinis. The Devises. The Boot family too, quietly, they've never spoken publicly because they're afraid of the backlash. Harry was processing fast. This was bigger than his personal case. If Dumbledore had been systematically punishing neutral families for staying neutral, that was a pattern of corruption that went beyond theft, it was an abuse of institutional power that would horrify even his allies. I need names, Harry said. Families willing to testify or at least provide records. I can get you 3. Maybe 4, if the Zabinis decide it's in their interest, and it will be, once they see which way the wind is blowing. Daphne paused. There's a price. Name it. I want a seat at the table. Not as a token Slytherin or a pretty face to make your coalition look diverse. I want to be involved in strategy. I understand the neutral faction better than anyone in your circle, and I know how Dumbledore's network operates from the receiving end. You need that. Neville was watching Harry, waiting. He looked cautious but not opposed. Done, Harry said. You bring me the evidence and the allies, and you're in the inner circle. But Daphne, I need honesty. Complete. If you're playing an angle I can't see, I'll find out, and I won't be understanding about it. I'd expect nothing less. She extended her hand across the table. Her grip was cool and firm. Now. Eat your ice cream before it melts. We have work to do. They talked for an hour. Daphne was, Harry quickly realized, brilliant, not in the Hermione sense of knowing every textbook answer, but in a strategic, political sense that reminded him of Augusta Longbottom with 30 years less patience. She knew the Wizengamot like a chess player knew the board, and she walked Harry through the neutral faction's internal dynamics with a precision that made Neville's already good briefing look like a rough draft. The key swing votes are the Ogdens, the Marchbankses, and the Patils, she said, drawing a diagram on a napkin with her wand. The Ogdens are wealthy, fire whiskey money, and they've always been Dumbledore adjacent but not Dumbledore committed. Show them financial fraud and they'll pivot. The Marchbankses care about education more than politics. If you can frame the Hogwarts donations as misuse of funds that should have gone to students, Griselda Marchbanks will be incandescent. The Patils are newer money, still establishing themselves, they'll follow power, and right now you're the most interesting power in the room. You've thought about this before, Harry observed. I've been thinking about this for years. I just never had a weapon big enough to use. She looked at him, and for the first time, her expression softened from strategic to something more personal. I watched you in the DA last year. You taught people who'd been failed by every defense teacher they'd ever had, and you did it because it mattered, not because it benefited you. That's why I'm here, if you want the real reason. Not just because of what Dumbledore did to my family, because of who you are when no one's making you perform. The words landed somewhere unexpected, and Harry found himself momentarily without a response, which almost never happened anymore. Neville filled the silence by very carefully pretending to be deeply interested in his sundae. Thank you, Harry said finally. Don't thank me. Just don't lose. They parted ways in the late morning, Daphne to contact the neutral families, Neville to prepare Wizengamot's strategy with Augusta. Harry operated back to Potter Manor and found a Gringotts delegation already waiting at the gates. Griphook was there, along with 2 goblin researchers and Director Ragnarok himself, a massive goblin, nearly 4 feet tall and broad as a barrel, with ceremonial armor and a presence that made the air feel heavier. Harry met them at the front door and led them to the war room, because it felt right and because the round table gave them all equal seating. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Ragnox said, his voice like gravel in a tumbler. Gringotts does not often leave the bank for meetings. We are here because what our researchers have found is of grave concern, to you, to us, and to the magical world. The Horcruxes, Harry said. Ragnox's eyebrows rose fractionally. You've done your own research. My family's library is extensive. I know what a Horcrux is, and I believe Voldemort has created more than one. The diary I destroyed in 1992 was one. The goblins exchanged looks. Griphook produced a folder and laid it open on the table. Our investigation of Dumbledore's expenditures revealed 17 separate transactions with a dealer named Caractacus Burke, now deceased, spanning from 1985 to 1996. The items purchased were all connected to Horcrux lore, detection methods, containment vessels, historical accounts of Horcrux creation and destruction. Dumbledore was building a comprehensive understanding of this magic. Griphook tapped the folder. We also found evidence that Dumbledore visited several locations associated with Tom Riddle's personal history, an orphanage, a former residence, a cave on the coast. Expenses for these trips were charged to your accounts. He was hunting Horcruxes, Harry said. Using my money to fund the hunt, without telling me anything about it. It appears so. And based on the volume of research and the number of locations investigated, he believed, or discovered, that Voldemort created multiple Horcruxes. How many? Ragnox took over. Goblin magic is different from wizard magic, Lord Potter. We have ways of detecting soul anchors that wizards do not. When you visited Gringotts 2 days ago, our wards detected something anomalous about your magical signature. The room went very quiet. There is a fragment of foreign magic attached to your soul, Ragnox said. It is contained within your scar. Based on our analysis, it is consistent with a Horcrux, an unintentional one, created when the killing curse rebounded on Voldemort in 1981. Harry sat very still. The thought he'd pushed away yesterday, the one he hadn't been ready for, it was here now, spoken aloud by the director of Gringotts in the war room of Potter Manor. A piece of Voldemort's soul was inside him. Can you remove it? He asked, and his voice came out steady, which surprised him. We can. Goblin soul magic predates wizard understanding of Horcruxes by millennia. The fragment is parasitic but shallow, it is attached to your scar, not to your core. Removal is possible without damage to your soul. It will require a ritual, preparation, and a specific set of conditions, but it can be done. How long? 3 days to prepare. The ritual itself takes approximately 1 hour. Harry closed his eyes. Inside him, behind the scar, he could feel it now, the thing he'd always felt, the cold spot, the connection to Voldemort that pulsed with anger and malice and alien thought. Not a mysterious link. Not a cursed scar. A piece of a monster's soul, lodged in his head since he was a baby. And Dumbledore had known. He must have known, the research, the expense, the years of study. He'd known there was a Horcrux in Harry's scar and he'd said nothing. What had the plan been? Had there been a plan? Or had Dumbledore been preparing Harry to die, the willing sacrifice, the weapon that walked itself to the enemy and offered its throat? Remove it, Harry said. As soon as it's ready. We will begin preparations immediately. Ragnox paused. Lord Potter. I want you to understand something. Goblins do not involve themselves in wizard wars. This is not our fight. But the violation of Gringotts security represented by Dumbledore's theft, and the dark magic we have discovered in its wake, this is our concern. You will have our full support, not as a favor, but as a matter of goblin honor. What was done to you was done under our roof, and that is an offense we will not forgive. Harry met the director's eyes, dark, ancient, hard as the stone beneath them. I understand. And I won't forget it. Ragnox nodded. Then we are allies. Not friends, goblins do not have friends among wizards. But allies, which is better. Friends forgive. Allies remember. The goblins left in the late afternoon, and Harry sat alone in the war room for a while, looking at the map of Britain with its pulsing red dots. A Horcrux in his scar. Possibly multiple Horcruxes scattered across the country. A war to fight, a political battle to wage, and 5 days until the Wisingamot session that would change everything. He was 16 years old and he had never felt less like a child. A tapping at the war room door interrupted his thoughts. Mipsy appeared, ears flat, wringing her hands. Master Harry, there is being visitors at the gate. 2 young ones. They is saying they is your friends. Harry's stomach tightened. Who? The red-haired boy and the bushy-haired girl, Master Harry. They is looking very upset. Ron and Hermione. Of course. He'd known this was coming, had been dreading it, if he was honest. Not the confrontation itself, but the possibility that it would end badly. They were his best friends. They'd fought beside him, bled beside him, nearly died beside him. But they were also Dumbledore's people, in ways that went deeper than loyalty. Ron's family depended on the Order, and Hermione's entire understanding of the wizarding world was built on the framework of institutional trust that Dumbledore embodied. Let them in, Harry said. Bring them here. He heard them before he saw them, Ron's heavy footsteps and Hermione's quick, anxious stride echoing down the stone staircase. They burst into the war room, and for a moment, all 3 of them just looked at each other. Ron was red-faced, his jaw set in the stubborn line that meant he was angry but not sure who at. Hermione's eyes were wide, darting around the war room, taking in the magical map, the ancient stone, the Potter crest on the walls, and Harry, sitting at the round table in his father's clothes with 3 lordship crests cycling on his ring and a presence that filled the room. Harry, Hermione said. What is going on? Dumbledore told the Order you've been taken in by the goblins, that you're being manipulated, that, Hermione. Stop. Harry's voice was quiet but it carried a weight it hadn't before, and Hermione stopped. Sit down. Both of you. I'll tell you everything, and then you can decide what you think. They sat. Harry told them. He didn't soften it, didn't editorialize, didn't try to manage their reactions. He laid out the facts, the audit, the theft, the will, the suppression ward, the Horcruxes, with the same precision the goblins had used, because the evidence spoke for itself and didn't need his anger to make it louder. Ron went pale at the numbers. 2 million galleons was abstract, almost meaningless in its enormity, but when Harry broke it down, the monthly withdrawals that could have funded his education 10 times over, the sold investments that would have made him independently wealthy, the 650,000 sitting in Dumbledore's personal vault, Ron's expression shifted from disbelief to a slow, burning fury. He paid for the Order with your money, Ron said. My parents, all those safe houses, the operations, that was all funded by money stolen from me. Yes. But Ron, I don't think your parents knew. The evidence suggests Dumbledore handled the finances personally. People believed it came from his own resources. But he let them believe that. He let my mom and dad think he was being generous while he was spending your inheritance. Ron's fists were clenched on the table. That's, Harry, that's worse. He made them grateful. He made them loyal with stolen money. Hermione hadn't spoken. She was sitting rigidly, her hands flat on the table, staring at the Gringotts folder Harry had laid out. Her face was a battlefield, he could see the war happening in real time, the part of her that trusted authority fighting the part of her that trusted evidence. These documents, she said finally. They're authenticated by Gringotts. Goblin forensic magic is considered the gold standard in international magical law. It's admissible in the Wisingamot, the ICW, and every magical court in Europe. But Dumbledore, he must have had reasons. The war, the Order, the fight against Voldemort, surely he was using the money for Hermione. Harry leaned forward. He put 650,000 galleons in his personal vault. He placed a magical suppression ward on me when I was a baby. He sealed my parents' will, which explicitly said he shouldn't be my guardian. He put me with the Dursleys, where I was starved and locked in a cupboard and told I was worthless, while I had 7 homes and 10 million galleons and a family of house elves who'd been waiting for me for 15 years. He kept his voice level, but the air in the room was crackling, and the candles on the table were burning unnaturally bright. What reason justifies that? Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. A tear ran down her cheek. None, she whispered. No, Harry agreed. None. The silence stretched. Ron broke it. What do you need us to do? Harry looked at his best friend, red-eared, furious, his loyalty settling like a compass finding north. Then at Hermione, who was crying silently but whose jaw was set in the way that meant she'd made a decision and God help anyone who got in her way. I need you to trust me, Harry said. And I need you to be ready for the fact that this is going to get ugly. Dumbledore won't go quietly, and the people who love him will fight for him. Some of them are people we love too. I don't want to destroy the Order or the Weasleys or anyone who was just following a man they believed in. But I will not let what he did stand. We're with you, Ron said, and Hermione nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then stay for dinner. I have a lot more to tell you, and Mipsy makes a roast that'll make you forget the Hogwarts kitchens exist. Ron's expression shifted from righteous fury to cautious hope. How good of a roast are we talking? Ron, Hermione said, exasperated. What? I can be angry and hungry. They're not mutually exclusive. Harry laughed, and the tension in the room cracked like ice in spring, and for a moment they were just 3 friends sitting around a table, and the world outside could wait. They stayed for dinner. They stayed for the evening. They stayed the night, in guest rooms that Mipsy prepared with ferocious efficiency, and Harry lay in bed that night listening to the manor settle around him and thinking about what was coming. Tomorrow he'd file formal charges with the DMLE. Daphne would bring him evidence from the neutral families. The goblins would begin preparing the Horcrux removal ritual. And in 4 days, he'd walk into the Wizengamot and face Albus Dumbledore across the chamber floor with the weight of 3 ancient houses behind him and the truth in his hands. He thought about his father's letter. You are more. He thought about Sirius, who'd left him the Black Legacy because he'd believed Harry could carry it. He thought about his mother, laughing as she told James to remind their son to comb his hair. He thought about Dumbledore, not with rage, not anymore, but with the cold clarity of someone who'd seen behind the curtain and wasn't afraid of the man pulling the strings. The ring on his hand pulsed gently, gold, silver, white, and the wards of Potter Manor sang their low, protective song, and Harry Potter slept without dreaming. Outside, in the valley, an owl winged its way north, carrying a message from Albus Dumbledore to a correspondent unknown. The old man's plans were shifting, his careful constructions trembling, and for the first time in a very long career, the greatest wizard of the age was worried about a 16-year-old boy. He should have been terrified. Chapter 3, The Greater Good. The morning of August 1st broke grey and heavy over London, the sky pressing down on the city like a lid, and Harry stood in the entrance hall of Potter Manor at 6 a.m. with his wand in his hand and his heart beating steady and slow. He'd spent the last 4 days in a blur of preparation that would have broken most people. Training in the mornings, 3 hours minimum, pushing his magic further each day, learning to wield his full power with the precision of a scalpel rather than the blunt force of a hammer. Political strategy in the afternoons with Neville, Daphne, and Augusta, mapping the Wizengamot chamber vote by vote, argument by argument. Evenings with the Gringotts forensic team, reviewing evidence, anticipating Dumbledore's defenses, closing every loophole before it could be exploited. And 2 days ago, in the deep ritual chambers beneath Gringotts, the Horcrux removal. He still felt the absence of it, the soul fragment, the cold spot behind his scar that had been his unwanted companion for 15 years. The ritual had been brutal. 3 hours, not 1, because the fragment had fought back with a viciousness that surprised even the goblins, Voldemort's soul shard screaming and thrashing as goblin magic pried it loose. Harry had held on, jaw locked, while something that was and wasn't Voldemort shrieked inside his skull and tried to drag him into a darkness that whispered, "We are one, you cannot survive without me." And then it was out, contained in a crystal sphere that the goblins sealed with 17 layers of ward magic, and Harry had gasped on the ritual floor like a man breaking the surface after too long underwater. The scar was still there. But it was just a scar now, no pain, no connection, no alien emotions bleeding through. For the first time in his memory, his mind was entirely his own. The silence was extraordinary. He looked at himself in the entrance hall mirror. He'd chosen his clothes carefully, not his father's today, but new ones. Mipsy had altered a set of formal robes found in the family vault, and Daphne had advised on the details with a ruthlessness that bordered on art direction. The outer robe was black, severe, cut close to his frame and lined with deep crimson. Beneath it, a waistcoat of dark gray embroidered with the 3 house crests in silver thread so subtle you'd only see it up close. White shirt. Black trousers. Dragonhide boots that had belonged to his grandfather and still carried enchantments that would stop most curses below the knee. The lordship ring gleamed on his right hand, the 3 crests cycling in slow rotation. He looked, he thought, like someone you did not want to cross. That was the point. "Master Harry is looking very fearsome," Mipsy said from somewhere near his elbow. "Thank you, Mipsy. Mipsy has packed sandwiches. Political revolutions is being hungry work." Harry smiled, tucked the shrunken lunch package into his pocket, and apparat to London. The Ministry of Magic at 7 a.m. was already buzzing. Word had spread, it always did in the wizarding world, through the invisible network of gossip and rumor that moved faster than any owl. The Daily Prophet's morning edition carried a front-page headline that Daphne had planted through a contact: Lord Potter-Black-Peverell to address Wizengamot, financial charges against senior official. They hadn't named Dumbledore yet. That was deliberate. Let people speculate. Let the anticipation build. By the time Harry walked into the chamber, every eye would already be watching. He entered the ministry through the visitor's entrance, the telephone box on the street above, and descended into the atrium. Heads turned. People stopped mid-stride, conversations dying on their lips as Harry Potter walked through the Ministry of Magic looking nothing like the scruffy teenager they expected and everything like the lord of 3 ancient houses come to settle a score. He didn't hurry. He didn't avoid eye contact. He walked through the atrium with his shoulders back and his magic controlled but present, a pressure in the air that made people step aside without quite knowing why. Percy Weasley, crossing the atrium with an armful of files, did a double-take so violent he dropped half of them. Neville was waiting by the lifts, dressed in formal long-bottom robes of deep blue, and beside him was Augusta, resplendent in her vulture hat and an expression of grim satisfaction. They fell into step with Harry without a word. The formation itself was a statement, 3 ancient houses moving as one. The Wizengamot chamber was in the depths of the ministry, accessible by a dedicated lift that dropped so far underground the air changed. Harry felt the wards around the chamber as they descended, old magic, layered over centuries, designed to compel truth and prevent violence. They pressed against his power and he pressed back, gently, establishing himself. The wards recognized the lordship rings and parted for him, granting access with a deep, resonant hum that he felt in his chest. The chamber itself was circular, tiered like a Roman amphitheater, with high-backed seats arranged in concentric rings around a central floor. Each seat bore the crest of the family that held it, and enchanted plaques displayed the current holder's name. As Harry entered through the main doors, he saw his seats, 3 of them, marked Potter, Black, and Peverell, arranged at different points around the chamber. He'd been assigned the Potter seat, with proxies for the other 2. Neville had offered to hold the Black proxy, Augusta held Peverell's, though she had her own long-bottom seat as well. The chamber was already half full and filling fast. Wizengamot sessions were usually sparsely attended, routine legislative business didn't draw crowds. But today, Every seat was filling, and the gallery above was packed with observers, journalists, and ministry officials who'd suddenly found pressing reasons to be in the building. Harry saw faces he recognized. Amelia Bones, in her DMLE seat, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp. Cyrus Greengrass, a tall man with his daughter's coloring and a poker face that could have won tournaments, seated in the neutral section. Lucius Malfoy's seat was empty, he was in Azkaban, but the Malfoy proxy was held by a solicitor who watched the proceedings with reptilian attention. The Weasley seat, which Harry hadn't known existed, was occupied by a wizard he didn't recognize, some distant relation who held the hereditary claim that Arthur had never pursued. And at the highest point of the chamber, in the ornate chair of the Chief Warlock, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked up at him. Dumbledore looked down. Their eyes met across the full depth of the chamber, and for a moment the noise and motion of the filling room fell away and there was nothing but the two of them and 15 years of lies between them. Dumbledore looked tired. That was the first thing Harry noticed. The old man's face was drawn, the lines deeper than Harry remembered, and his blue eyes, usually twinkling, always performing that grandfatherly warmth, were flat and watchful. He knows, Harry thought. He's known since Gringotts froze his accounts. He's had 4 days to prepare. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze for a full 5 seconds, then broke it deliberately and took his seat. The Potter chair accepted him with a flare of golden magic that drew murmurs from around the chamber. Daphne was in the gallery, seated near the press section. She caught Harry's eye and gave him a fractional nod. Everything was in place. The session was called to order at 9 a.m. by Dumbledore himself, which Harry found darkly amusing. The man would be presiding over his own prosecution. That wouldn't last, but for now, protocol required the Chief Warlock to open proceedings. The Wizengamot is convened, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber with that effortless authority that had commanded rooms for a century. We have several items of business today, beginning with, point of order. Harry's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. He was on his feet, and every head in the room swiveled toward him. Dumbledore paused, one hand raised in mid-gesture, and looked at Harry with an expression that was almost, surprised. The chair recognizes Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Dumbledore said, and his voice was perfectly controlled, but Harry saw his hand lower a fraction too slowly. Before regular business proceeds, I am invoking my right under Article 12 of the Wizengamot Charter to bring an emergency petition of grievance against a sitting member of this body. The charges are theft, fraud, abuse of magical guardianship, illegal suppression of a minor's magic, and obstruction of testamentary proceedings. The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped, shouts, gasps, the scratch of a dozen quick-quotes quills firing simultaneously. In the gallery, the press section was in chaos. Dumbledore raised his hand and silence fell, enforced partly by his authority and partly by a subtle calming charm woven into the chamber's wards. An emergency petition of grievance is a serious matter, Lord Potter. Against whom do you bring these charges? Harry looked directly at him. Against you, Chief Warlock. Against Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses against the eardrums. Harry could hear the scratching of the chamber's recording quills, documenting every word in the permanent Wizengamot record. Dumbledore sat very still. Then, slowly, he leaned back in the Chief Warlock's chair and steepled his fingers. I see, he said. Then by the rules of this body, I must recuse myself from presiding. Madam Bones, as head of the DMLE and senior member of the Judiciary Committee, would you assume the chair? I would, Amelia said, already rising. She climbed to the Chief Warlock's platform with brisk efficiency, and Dumbledore descended to take a seat on the chamber floor, the defendant's position, a single chair in the center of the room, facing the tiers. He sat in it with the composure of a man taking his usual seat at dinner, and Harry felt a flicker of reluctant respect. Whatever Dumbledore was, he wasn't a coward. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Amelia said from the chair, present your petition. Harry stepped down to the chamber floor. The acoustics were perfect. The room was designed so that a speaker in the center could be heard clearly in every seat without raising their voice. He carried the Gringotts folder in one hand, but he didn't open it. Not yet. Members of the Wisengamot, he began. On July 25 of this year, I visited Gringotts Wizarding Bank to claim my inheritance following the death of my godfather, Sirius Black. As a multi-house lordship claim, this triggered a mandatory heritage audit. What that audit revealed is the reason we're here today. He paused, letting the chamber settle. Every eye was on him. In his peripheral vision, he could see Dumbledore watching with that flat, assessing gaze. When my parents were murdered on October 31, 1981, they left behind a substantial estate. The Potter family vaults contained approximately 4.7 million galleons in liquid gold, with additional investments and properties worth roughly 2 million more. They also left a will, filed with both Gringotts and the Ministry, that specified my guardianship, my care, and the management of my estate in precise detail. He opened the folder and withdrew the first document. With a wave of his wand, he projected it onto the chamber wall, enlarged, crystal clear, the parchment glowing with the authentication seals of Gringotts forensic magic. This is my parents' will. It was sealed on November 1, 1981, the day after their death, by order of the Chief Warlock, Albus Dumbledore. I did not know this will existed until 4 days ago. No one in this chamber was permitted to see it, because it was sealed by the very person it sought to exclude. He read the relevant passage aloud, his parents' words filling the chamber. Under no circumstances shall Albus Dumbledore be granted guardianship of our son or control of our estates. We love and respect the man, but we do not trust his priorities where Harry's welfare is concerned. The murmurs began again, louder this time, with an edge of shock. Harry saw faces changing around the chamber. Cyrus Greengrass had gone very still. Griselda Marchbanks, ancient and sharp-eyed, was leaning forward in her seat. Even in the traditionally pro-Dumbledore section, there were furrowed brows and exchanged glances. On the same day he sealed this will, Harry continued, Albus Dumbledore filed documents with the Ministry appointing himself as my magical guardian. He used this fraudulent guardianship to gain access to my family vaults. And over the next 14 years, he systematically looted them. He began laying out the evidence. Document by document, transaction by transaction, with the Gringotts authentication seals glowing gold on the chamber wall. The monthly withdrawals. The sold investments. The transferred properties. The escalating amounts as the years went by and no one questioned the great Albus Dumbledore's authority over an orphan's gold. He showed them the numbers. 1.4 million from the Potter vaults. 710,000 from the Black vaults. The total, 2.1 million galleons, plus devalued investments and lost revenue. He showed them where the money went, the order allocations, the Hogwarts donations, the political spending. And then the personal vault deposits, 650,000 galleons that had no institutional purpose, no war justification, no explanation at all beyond personal enrichment. The chamber was deathly quiet now. Quick-quotes quills were scratching in a frenzy. In the gallery, Daphne's expression was carved from marble, but her eyes were blazing. And then, Harry said, there is the matter of the suppression ward. He projected the ward schema, the Gringotts Cursebreaker's analysis, showing the structure and effect of the magic that had been placed on him. Payment records showed annual retainer fees drawn from the Potter vault. On December 24, 1981, a magical suppression ward was placed on me. I was 15 months old. The ward was designed to limit my magical output to approximately 40% of my natural capacity. It was maintained and adjusted annually, at a cost of 5,000 galleons per year, charged to my own accounts. I was not informed. My magical development, my ability to defend myself, to learn, to grow, was deliberately crippled. He paused. The next part was for Dumbledore. Harry turned to face him. The ward was removed 4 days ago by Gringotts Cursebreakers. For the first time in my life, I have access to my full magical ability. To put this in context for the chamber, at 40% power, I produced a corporeal Patronus that drove off over 100 Dementors at the age of 13. At 40% power, I fought Voldemort to a standstill in a graveyard at 14. At 40% power, I led a group of students against 12 Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries and survived. He let that sink in. I leave it to the members of this body to consider what 40% of my power means in terms of what my full power represents. And I leave it to you to consider why the man sitting in that chair would want to ensure I never discovered it. The chamber broke into open noise, shouting, arguments erupting between factions, the press gallery in chaos. Amelia let it run for 30 seconds, then cracked her wand against the chief warlock's podium with a sound like a gunshot, and silence fell. The defendant, Amelia said, has the right to respond. Professor Dumbledore, do you wish to address the charges? Dumbledore stood. And this, Harry knew, was the dangerous part. Because Albus Dumbledore had not maintained his position for a century through power alone. He'd maintained it through persuasion, through the ability to stand in front of any audience and make them believe what he needed them to believe, to make the unreasonable sound like wisdom and the indefensible sound like sacrifice. Thank you, Madam Bones, Dumbledore said, and his voice was different now, not the commanding tone of the chief warlock but something softer, older, sadder. The voice of a tired man carrying a burden. Harry recognized the performance and braced for it. I will not insult this body by denying the facts Lord Potter has presented. The Gringotts records are accurate. The transactions occurred as described. The will was sealed. The ward was placed. Dumbledore paused, letting the admission land. It was a masterful move. By conceding the facts, he shifted the battlefield to interpretation. Harry had expected this. What I will ask this body to consider is why. Dumbledore turned slowly, addressing the full chamber, making eye contact with member after member in that way he had that made each person feel individually seen. In November of 1981, Voldemort had just fallen. The wizarding world was in chaos. Death Eaters were still active, still dangerous, still hunting the families who had opposed them. And in the ruins of a house in Godric's Hollow, there was a baby, a 15-month-old child with a lightning bolt scar and a prophecy hanging over his head that marked him as the only person who could end the darkest wizard in history. His voice dropped, intimate now, confessional. I was afraid. I will admit it freely. I was afraid for that child, for Harry, because I knew what was coming. I knew that Voldemort was not truly dead. I knew he would return. And I knew that Harry would be the one to face him. Everything I did to prepare for that day. The guardianship, yes, I overrode James and Lily's will, and it is the action I regret most deeply. But the blood wards at Privet Drive, Lily's sacrifice, channeled through her sister, were the most powerful protection available. No other guardian could have provided that. Sirius Black was in Azkaban. The Longbottoms were incapacitated. Amelia, with all respect, was a single woman running the DMLE in wartime. The Dursleys were the only option that kept Harry alive. Harry watched the chamber. People were listening. Dumbledore's words were working on them, he could see it in the way bodies leaned forward, the way expressions softened from outrage to consideration. The old man was good. The funds from the Potter and Black vaults, I will not pretend that every canute was spent wisely. But the majority funded the Order of the Phoenix, which operated for over a decade to protect the wizarding world from the Death Eater threat. Safe houses. Intelligence operations. Protection for targeted families. When the ministry refused to act, the Order acted instead, and the gold that funded it saved lives. And the suppression ward. Dumbledore's voice went very quiet. Yes. I ordered it placed. Because a child with that level of raw magical power, untrained and uncontrolled, in a Muggle household, the accidental magic alone could have been catastrophic. The ward was not punishment. It was protection, for Harry and for those around him. He turned to face Harry, and his expression was pained, sincere, utterly convincing. "Harry, I am sorry. I should have told you. I should have trusted you with the truth, and I did not, and that failure is mine to bear. But everything I did because I believed it was necessary to keep you alive long enough to fulfill the destiny that was placed upon you before you could walk." He sat down. The chamber was trembling, not physically, but emotionally. Dumbledore had turned a prosecution into a confession, a crime into a sacrifice, and Harry could see the shift happening in real time. And this was the moment Harry had prepared for. Not just with evidence and documents and political allies, but with the one weapon Dumbledore hadn't anticipated, because Dumbledore had never seen Harry as someone who could outthink him. Harry stood and walked to the center of the chamber floor, positioning himself directly between Dumbledore and the Wizengamot, commanding the room's attention with his physical presence and the weight of his magic, which he let press outward deliberately now, not aggressively, but undeniably. The air grew thick with it. Members shifted in their seats. Quills paused. "That," Harry said, "was the most eloquent justification for child abuse I've ever heard." The words landed like stones in still water. Dumbledore's expression flickered. "Let me address the Chief Warlocks, forgive me, the former Chief Warlocks, defense point by point. First, the Blood Wards at Privet Drive. He claims they required Petunia Dursley as guardian. This is true, the Blood Ward anchored through a maternal relative is powerful protection against external magical threats." Harry paused. "But the ward requires only that I reside at the location for a minimum period each year. There was nothing preventing a magical guardian from providing supplementary care, education, or even basic welfare checks. In 15 years, not one member of the magical world visited me at Privet Drive to ensure I was being treated properly. I was sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs until I was 11. I was being starved, verbally abused, and treated as unpaid labor. The Blood Wards kept Voldemort's followers out. They did nothing to protect me from the people inside." He let that sit. Several members of the Wizengamot looked physically ill. "Second, the Order of the Phoenix. I do not dispute that the Order has done valuable work. I do not blame its members, who believed they were serving a just cause funded by a generous leader. But, and this is the critical point, it was not his money to spend. If Albus Dumbledore had come to me, or to my legal guardians as specified in my parents' will, and asked for funding, I would likely have agreed. I am not a miser. I believe in fighting Voldemort. But he didn't ask. He forged documents, sealed a will, and took what he wanted without permission or oversight, because he decided that his judgment superseded the law, my parents' wishes, and my rights as a human being." Harry withdrew another document from his folder and projected it. "This is the account ledger for Dumbledore's personal vault at Gringotts. 650,000 galleons deposited over 14 years, sourced directly from unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts. Not the Order. Not Hogwarts. Not the war effort. His personal vault. I invite the Chief Warlock, I'm sorry, old habits, I invite Professor Dumbledore to explain what aspect of the greater good required him to enrich himself by 650,000 galleons from an orphan's inheritance." Harry turned to look at Dumbledore. The old man's jaw tightened, just slightly, the first crack in the performance. "Perhaps it funded his wardrobe," Harry said. "Those robes are quite magnificent." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter ran through the chamber, immediately suppressed. But it had done its work, it had punctured the solemnity, the aura of tragic nobility that Dumbledore had built. It had made him look, for just a moment, ridiculous. "Third," Harry continued, and his voice hardened. "The Suppression Ward. Professor Dumbledore claims it was placed to prevent accidental magic in a Muggle household. This is a lie." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. The ward schema obtained by Gringotts shows that it was designed not merely to limit accidental magic, which could have been achieved with a simple dampening charm renewed annually, but to permanently restrict my magical core's development. The ward's design includes adaptive suppression, meaning it grew stronger as my magic grew stronger, ensuring that I would never reach my full potential without its removal. This is not protection. This is crippling. He pulled out the ward schema analysis and projected it. Runes and diagrams filled the wall, annotated in Griphook's precise handwriting. Gringotts Cursebreakers have identified the ward master who built it, Arcturus Selwyn, a known associate of the Death Eater movement who was paid 5,000 galleons annually from my vault. Dumbledore hired a man with Death Eater sympathies to suppress the magic of the child prophesied to defeat Voldemort. I leave the chamber to draw its own conclusions about what that implies. The murmurs now were angry. The political temperature in the room had shifted decisively. Dumbledore's speech had bought him time, but Harry was spending it faster than the old man could earn it. In the neutral section, Cyrus Greengrass was nodding slowly. Griselda Marchbanks looked thunderous. And finally, Harry said, and he reached into his folder for the last document, the one he'd held back, the one that Daphne had helped him prepare. I would like to enter into evidence testimony from 4 additional ancient and noble houses who have experienced financial interference, economic sabotage, or political retaliation from Professor Dumbledore or individuals acting at his direction. He projected 4 sworn statements: Greengrass, Zabini, Davis, and Boot. Each one detailed a pattern of interference: blocked contracts, delayed licenses, redirected ministry resources, social pressure applied through Dumbledore's network of allies. The amounts were smaller than Harry's theft, the method subtler, but the pattern was unmistakable. Albus Dumbledore had spent decades punishing anyone who refused to join his banner. Daphne had done extraordinary work. The statements were precise, evidenced, and devastating. Cyrus Greengrass's testimony alone documented 20 years of systematic economic warfare, complete with dates, amounts, and the names of ministry officials who'd acted as intermediaries. The chamber was in uproar. Amelia cracked her wand against the podium 3 times before order was restored. "This body will come to order," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Professor Dumbledore, you have the right to respond to the additional evidence." Dumbledore stood again, but the room was different now. The sympathy he'd cultivated was fracturing, and Harry could see him calculating, adjusting, trying to find the angle that would save him. The old man's eyes swept the chamber, reading faces, counting votes, and for the first time, Harry saw something in those blue eyes that wasn't performance. It was fear. Not terror. Albus Dumbledore didn't do terror, but the cold, precise fear of a man who'd built a castle of control and was watching the foundations crack. "The testimony of the neutral families is concerning," Dumbledore said carefully. "I will not respond to specific allegations without time to review them. But I must remind this body of the context in which all of these decisions were made. We are at war. Lord Voldemort has returned, and every action I have taken, every one, has been in service of ensuring that the wizarding world survives. The neutral families may feel aggrieved by my methods, but their neutrality in the face of existential threat is not a position I have the luxury of respecting when lives are at stake." "So you admit it," Harry said, and the chamber went quiet. "You admit that you targeted families for choosing not to fight in your war." Dumbledore's mouth pressed into a thin line. "I admit that I applied pressure where I judged it was needed." Applied pressure. An interesting euphemism for economic sabotage. Harry shook his head. "Professor, you've just told the Wizengamot, the legislative body responsible for protecting the rights of every magical family in Britain, that you believe it's acceptable to punish families for exercising their legal right to neutrality. In wartime. Using stolen money and institutional power that was never yours to wield." He turned to face the chamber. "Members of the Wizengamot, I ask you, if he did it to me, if he did it to the Greengrasses and the Zabinis and the Devisas, what has he done that we haven't discovered yet? And who else has been too afraid to speak?" The vote was interrupted by something nobody expected. The chamber doors blew open, not metaphorically, not with a dramatic swing, but exploded inward with a concussion of dark magic that sent splinters of ancient oak scything through the air. The chamber's protective wards flared, catching most of the debris, but the force of the breach staggered people in their seats and sent the recording quills spiraling. Through the ruined doorway came Death Eaters. 6 of them, masked and robed, wands out, moving in a combat formation that spoke of planning and purpose. They'd breached the ministry, again, and this time they'd come for the heart of magical government. The chamber descended into chaos. Wizengamot members scrambled for cover, some drawing wands, most panicking. Aurors stationed outside the chamber rushed toward the breach, but 2 of them went down immediately, hit by curses before they could engage. The Death Eaters spread out, establishing a perimeter around the chamber doors, and one of them, tall, moving with a predatory grace that Harry recognized, stepped forward and raised his wand. "The Dark Lord sends his regards to the Wizengamot," said the voice of Bellatrix Lestrange from behind her mask. "He appreciates you gathering so conveniently. This will be quick." Harry was already moving. The transition from political operator to combat wizard took less than a heartbeat. His wand was in his hand, his magic surging through him with a force that made the air around him shimmer, and he was off the chamber floor and into the space between the Death Eaters and the Wizengamot before Bellatrix had finished speaking. He didn't shout his spells. He didn't need to. The first stunner hit the Death Eater on Bellatrix's left with enough force to lift the man off his feet and slam him into the far wall, where he stuck, unconscious and embedded in the stone. The second caught another mid-cast, deflecting a killing curse into the ceiling and following up with a binding spell that wrapped the Death Eater in chains of blue light. Bellatrix turned on him, her mask falling away to reveal the wild-eyed face beneath, and she laughed, that high, mad laugh that had haunted Harry's dreams since the Department of Mysteries. "Baby Potter," she shrieked. "Come to play." She launched a volley of curses, purple, black, sickly green, and Harry didn't dodge. He raised his left hand, wandless, and caught the volley on a shield that materialized from pure will, a shimmering dome of silver-white magic that absorbed the curses like water-swallowing stones. Bellatrix's eyes went wide behind the madness. "Something's different about you, little boy," she hissed. "Yes," Harry said. "It is." He moved. Not ran, apparat, a microjump of 3 feet that put him inside her guard, and his wand came up in a tight arc that chain-cast 3 spells in the space of a breath, a disarming charm that ripped Bellatrix's wand from her hand with such force it shattered the bones in her fingers, a body bind that locked her rigid, and a banishing spell that sent her skidding across the chamber floor to slam against the base of the Wizengamot tiers. 3 seconds. One of the most dangerous Death Eaters in Voldemort's inner circle, and Harry had dismantled her in 3 seconds. The remaining Death Eaters hesitated. That hesitation was fatal, not because Harry killed them, but because it gave Neville time to enter the fight from the left flank and Amelia Bones time to start casting from the Chief Warlock's platform. Neville's first spell was a bombarda that obliterated the floor beneath 2 Death Eaters' feet, dropping them into a crater of shattered stone, and his second was a binding spell that pinned them there. Amelia's casting was precise and ruthless, textbook horror combat magic that took down the 5th Death Eater with clinical efficiency. The 6th made a break for the ruined doors. Harry flicked his wand almost lazily and a wall of invisible force slammed across the doorway like a portcullis. The Death Eater hit it at full sprint and bounced backward, unconscious before he touched the ground. The entire engagement had lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Harry stood in the center of the Wizengamot chamber, surrounded by 6 incapacitated Death Eaters, his magic rolling off him in visible waves that distorted the air like heat from asphalt. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't injured. He looked up at the assembled Wizengamot, shocked, terrified, several of them bleeding from the initial blast, and he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "This is what Dumbledore's suppression ward was preventing." The silence was vast. Absolute. Dumbledore, still in the defendant's chair, sat perfectly still. His face was gray. Amelia recovered first. "Horrors. Secure the prisoners and lock down the chamber. I want a full security sweep of the ministry." She turned to Harry. "Lord Potter. Are you injured?" "No. That was exceptional work." It was necessary. He looked at Bellatrix, bound and broken-fingered on the chamber floor, and felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. She'd killed Sirius. She'd tortured Neville's parents. And she'd been brought down in 3 seconds by the boy she'd mocked. Neville crossed the chamber to stand beside Harry, his wand still drawn, dirt and stone dust on his robes. He looked at Bellatrix too, and his face was hard and set and nothing like the round-cheeked boy who'd lost his toad on the Hogwarts Express. "Nice work," Harry said. "I've been practicing," Neville said, and there was something fierce and raw in his voice that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the woman lying on the floor. Amelia restored order with impressive speed. Horrors flooded the chamber, the Death Eaters were secured and removed, and the damaged doors were repaired with a wave of wands from the maintenance team. Within 15 minutes, the Wizengamot was reassembled, shaken but functional, and the mood in the room had undergone a transformation so fundamental that Harry could feel it in the wards. Dumbledore's defense had relied on one pillar above all others, that he was necessary. That however flawed his methods, he was the indispensable leader, the only wizard powerful enough to protect the magical world from Voldemort. Harry had just demolished that pillar with extreme prejudice, in front of every member of the Wizengamot and the entire press gallery. He didn't need Dumbledore. He was 16 years old, and he'd just taken out 6 Death Eaters including Bellatrix Lestrange in 20 seconds, and the whole Wizengamot had watched him do it. Amelia called the session back to order. "Before we were interrupted," she said, with a dryness that drew nervous laughter from the chamber, "we were hearing charges brought by Lord Potter-Black-Peverell against Albus Dumbledore. Given the events the chamber has just witnessed, I think we can dispense with further debate and move to a vote." She surveyed the room. "Does any member wish to speak before we proceed?" Griselda Marchbanks rose, ancient and formidable. "I have heard enough. The evidence is clear. The defense is insufficient. And after what we just saw, the suggestion that this young man needs anyone's protection or management is frankly insulting. I call for an immediate vote." "Seconded," said Cyrus Greengrass. "Thirded," said Augusta Longbottom, with relish. Dumbledore stood. "Madam Bones, if I may." "You may not," Amelia said. "You've had your opportunity to respond. The chamber has heard both sides. We will proceed to a vote on the following motions. First, that Albus Dumbledore be stripped of the position of Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Second, that he be removed as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry pending a full investigation. Third, that all stolen funds be returned to the Potter and Black estates with interest and penalties as determined by Gringotts. Fourth, that a formal investigation be opened into the additional charges of economic sabotage against neutral families." She raised her wand. "All in favor of the first motion." Wands lit across the chamber, not a majority, a supermajority, a sea of light that left no room for ambiguity. The opposition was thin, a handful of seats in the pro-Dumbledore section, die-hard loyalists who would have voted for the old man if he'd been caught over a body. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close. The remaining motions passed with similar margins. Dumbledore sat through each vote with his hands folded in his lap and his expression carved from stone, and when the last vote was tallied and Amelia announced the results, he simply nodded, once, slowly, and stood. "I accept the Wizengamot's decision," he said, and his voice was quiet but it carried. "I maintain that my actions were taken in good faith, in service of the greater good, and I will cooperate fully with any investigation." He paused, and looked at Harry with an expression that was complex and layered, pain, calculation, something that might have been pride or might have been its carefully constructed imitation. "Lord Potter. I hope that when the full truth of what we face is known, you will understand why I made the choices I did." "I already know the full truth, Professor," Harry said. "You just don't know that I know it yet." Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes, uncertainty, for the first time, genuine uncertainty, and then the old man turned and walked out of the chamber with his back straight and his head high, and the doors closed behind him, and the Wizengamot exhaled. The aftermath was a controlled avalanche. Journalists descended on Harry in the atrium and he gave a brief, precise statement that Daphne had helped him draft, emphasizing accountability and justice while carefully avoiding any language that could be construed as vindictive. He named no order members, cast no blame on individuals who'd served in good faith, and stressed that the charges were against Dumbledore personally, not against the organizations he'd led. Daphne found him in a corridor afterward, as the crowds were thinning. She looked slightly flushed, which was the most emotion Harry had seen her display in public. "That was," she said, and paused, searching for the word. "Effective?" "I was going to say, terrifying, but effective works. The Bellatrix thing, that wasn't part of the plan. Voldemort's timing was actually helpful. Ironic. Don't get used to it." She fell into step beside him as they walked. "The neutral families are in. All of them. Cyrus, my father, said he hasn't seen a session like that in 40 years. You have the political momentum. The question is whether you can hold it." "I'll hold it." She glanced sideways at him. "You know Dumbledore isn't done. He accepted the votes because he had no choice, but a man like that doesn't give up power willingly. He'll regroup. He'll find leverage. He'll come at you through people you care about." "I know. And you're not worried?" Harry stopped walking. They were in a quiet stretch of corridor, the noise of the atrium fading behind them, and the torchlight caught the sharp planes of Daphne's face and the watchful intelligence in her eyes. "I spent 15 years being afraid," he said. "Afraid of the Dursleys. Afraid of Voldemort. Afraid of failing, of not being enough, of losing the people I loved. And the whole time, I was operating at less than half my capacity, with a piece of a dark wizard's soul in my head and a stolen childhood behind me, and I still survived. I still fought. I still won, every time it mattered." He met her eyes. "I'm not worried about Dumbledore. I'm not worried about Voldemort. I'm done being afraid. It wasn't useful the first time, and it's certainly not useful now." Daphne studied him for a long moment, and then did something Harry didn't expect. She smiled. Not a strategic smile or a political one. A real one, small and surprised and genuine, that transformed her face from beautiful and intimidating to simply beautiful. "You know," she said, "when Neville first told me about all this, I thought you'd be angry. Self-righteous. The wronged hero on a crusade. That's what most people would be. And instead, you're something much more dangerous. You're calm." She started walking again. "Come on. We have work to do. The Wizengamot vote is just the beginning. Dumbledore still has allies in the Ministry, at Hogwarts, and in the Order. We need to move fast." "Fast is all I know," Harry said, catching up to her. "Ask anyone who's seen me on a broom." Was that a Quidditch metaphor? Are you flirting with me through Quidditch metaphors? Is it working? Absolutely not. Then it was a Quidditch metaphor. She shot him a look that was half exasperation and half something warmer, and Harry grinned, and they walked through the Ministry together, and behind them the wizarding world was rewriting itself. By evening, Potter Manor was full. Not crowded, the house was enormous and could have held a small army, but populated in a way it hadn't been in 15 years. Neville and Augusta were in the war room, reviewing the Wizengamot outcome and planning next steps. Ron and Hermione had arrived by Flo. Harry had connected Potter Manor to the network, keyed to specific individuals, and Ron was in the kitchen helping Mipsy with dinner while Hermione was in the library, already halfway through the section on ward magic with a stack of notes growing beside her. Daphne was on the terrace, watching the sun set over the Welsh Valley with a cup of tea and an expression of private contentment that she probably would have denied if anyone pointed it out. And Harry was in his father's study, sitting at his father's desk, writing letters to Remus Lupin, explaining everything and inviting him to Potter Manor. To the Weasley family, through Arthur specifically, laying out the truth with care and compassion and an explicit statement that he held no grudge against anyone who'd served the Order in good faith. To Minerva McGonagall, because with Dumbledore removed as headmaster, Hogwarts needed leadership, and Harry could think of no one better. To Gringotts, authorizing the forensic team to continue their Horcrux investigation and requesting a full briefing on any additional soul anchors they could detect. And one last letter, the hardest one. He sealed it and held it in his hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of the words inside. It was addressed to Albus Dumbledore, and it said, "Professor, I know about the Horcruxes. All of them. The diary I destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets. The fragment that was in my scar, which the goblins have removed. And however many others exist, I will find them and destroy them, with or without your cooperation. You could have told me. You could have trusted me. Instead, you stole my gold to fund your research, suppressed my power to keep me manageable, and planned, I believe, to send me to my death as a willing sacrifice because you thought the Horcrux in my scar could only be destroyed if I died. You were wrong. The goblins removed it without killing me. Your grand plan, your terrible calculus, your greater good, it was never necessary. There was always another way. You just never looked for one because looking would have meant admitting you didn't have all the answers. I am going to end this war. I am going to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes and then I am going to destroy Voldemort. And I am going to do it without sacrificing anyone, not myself, not my friends, not the people you've spent years positioning as acceptable losses. If you want to help, you can start by telling me everything you know. No more games, no more rationed information, no more manipulation disguised as mentorship. Come to Potter Manor. Sit at my table as an equal, not a puppet master. Answer my questions honestly. And maybe, we can end this together. But if you come with schemes, or try to regain control, or attempt to manipulate the people I care about, I will end your career, your reputation, and your freedom with the same thoroughness I demonstrated today. Your move, Professor. Harry James Potter, Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. He sealed the letter, gave it to the eagle owl waiting on the windowsill, and watched it wing away into the darkening sky. Then he went downstairs, where his friends were gathered and the house was warm and alive and full of the sounds of people laughing, arguing, planning, and living. He sat down at the kitchen table, where Ron had somehow convinced Mipsy to let him help with the roast, a development that had the elf torn between horror and delight, and Hermione was explaining ward theory to Neville with diagrams drawn on napkins, and Daphne had come inside and was listening to Augusta tell a story about the Wizengamot of 1962 with an expression of rapt attention. Harry looked at them, his people, his allies, his friends, and felt something that wasn't grief or anger or cold determination. It was the thing he'd been missing for 3 weeks, the thing he'd lost when Sirius fell through the veil. It was hope. Outside, the wards of Potter Manor hummed their steady song, and the war room's map pulsed with red dots that each represented a piece of the fight still to come. Voldemort was out there. Dumbledore was out there. The Horcruxes were out there. But Harry was here, surrounded by people who chose to stand with him, in a house that was finally, truly home. The fight was just beginning. He was ready. Chapter 4, Legacy. 3 days after the Wizengamot session, and the wizarding world was still on fire. The Daily Prophet had run the story on every front page since August 1st, each edition more explosive than the last. The first day's headline, Dumbledore stripped of titles, Lord Potter reveals 15 years of theft, had sold out within an hour. The second day brought the neutral family's testimony in full, with Cyrus Greengrass giving an exclusive interview that was measured, devastating, and impossible to dismiss. The third day's edition featured a leaked copy of the ward schema, analyzed by independent cursebreakers who confirmed Gringotts' findings and added their own horrified commentary. Public opinion was a living thing, and Harry could feel it shifting like a tide. Letters poured into Potter Manor by the hundreds, from strangers, from Hogwarts students, from witches and wizards across Britain who'd read the evidence and felt something crack in the bedrock of their assumptions. Some were supportive. Some were furious, at Dumbledore, at Harry, at the world for being more complicated than they'd wanted it to be. A few were threats, and those Harry handed to Amelia Bones, who tracked each one with grim professionalism. But Harry wasn't focused on public opinion. He was focused on what came next. The morning of August 4th found him in the war room at dawn, standing over the magical map of Britain with Griphook's latest report spread across the table. The goblins had been busy. Their soul detection magic, ancient, precise, capable of sensing Horcrux signatures across vast distances when properly calibrated, had identified 3 probable locations for Voldemort's remaining soul anchors. The first was in London, somewhere in the vicinity of Knockturn Alley. The second was in a location that corresponded to a stretch of wild coastline in the west of England, a cave, if Dumbledore's travel records were accurate. The third was at Hogwarts itself, hidden somewhere within the castle, its signature masked by the overwhelming ambient magic of the school. Harry studied the map, tracing the ley lines that connected the locations. 3 Horcruxes, plus the diary he'd already destroyed and the fragment the goblins had removed from his scar. 5 total. Or were there more? The Potter Library's treatise on Horcruxes suggested that creating more than one was insanity, that each split diminished the creator's soul and sanity in geometric proportion. But Voldemort had never been constrained by conventional wisdom. "You're overthinking it." Daphne's voice came from the staircase. She descended into the war room in bare feet and one of what appeared to be Hermione's jumpers, her hair loose around her shoulders, a mug of tea in each hand. She set one in front of Harry and took a seat at the round table, pulling her knees up to her chest in a way that made her look startlingly young. "I'm trying to figure out how many pieces someone would tear their soul into," Harry said. 7, Daphne said. Harry looked at her. "What? 7. If I were a dark wizard obsessed with magical numerology, and Voldemort is, based on everything I've read about his pattern of behavior, I'd choose 7. It's the most magically potent number. 7 years at Hogwarts. 7 floors. 7 players on a Quidditch team. 7 ingredients in the most powerful potions." She sipped her tea. "Also, 6 Horcruxes plus the main soul fragment in his body equals 7 pieces total. It's elegant, in a horrifying sort of way." Harry stared at the map, his mind racing. The diary. The scar fragment. The 3 the goblins had detected. That was 5. If Daphne was right, 6 Horcruxes total, 7 pieces, there was one more out there that the goblins hadn't found. "How did you? I read the same books you did." "The Potter Library is extraordinary, by the way. Hermione's been in there since 5 a.m., and I think she might actually weep when she has to leave." Daphne set down her mug and leaned forward, studying the map. "The one at Hogwarts worries me. The castle's magic is so dense that finding a single Horcrux inside it would be like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. Unless I can get inside and narrow the search." "You're going back to Hogwarts?" "I have to. But not as a student." Harry traced a circle around the Hogwarts marker on the map. "McGonagall wrote back last night. She's accepted the position of acting headmistress, the Board of Governors confirmed it unanimously. She's invited me to the castle to discuss everything." "She knows about the Horcruxes?" "Not yet. But she will. I'm done keeping secrets from the people I trust." Daphne was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the map. "Then, take me with you." "To Hogwarts?" "To all of it. The Horcrux hunt." She looked up at him, and her expression was the one he'd come to recognize, the one that meant she'd already thought it through and was asking as a formality. "You're building a team, Harry. Neville's your political arm and your combat partner. Ron and Hermione are your tactical support. The goblins are your financial and magical infrastructure. But you need someone whose mind works differently from yours, someone who thinks about patterns and motivations and the way dark wizards build systems. That's what I do. That's what growing up neutral in a world that demands you pick a side teaches you to do. It's dangerous. Everything is dangerous. I watched you take down Bellatrix Lestrange in 3 seconds. I think I'll manage." Harry looked at her, bare feet, borrowed jumper, steel in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest, a tectonic realignment that had nothing to do with politics or power or war. He pushed it aside. There would be time for that later. There had to be. "All right," he said. "You're in." "I was always in. I just wanted to hear you say it." She smiled, quick and sharp, and stood up. "Now come upstairs. Mipsy's made breakfast and Ron's already on his third plate. If you want any bacon, you'll need to move fast." The kitchen at Potter Manor had become the nerve center of the operation, not by design but by gravity. It was the warmest room in the house, the one with the best food, and the one where people naturally gathered. By 8 a.m., the full team was assembled around the long oak table: Harry, Daphne, Neville, Ron, Hermione, and, as of last night, Remus Lupin, who'd arrived at the gates of Potter Manor looking haggard and shattered and had spent 3 hours reading the Gringotts evidence in silence before saying, very quietly, "I'm going to need something stronger than tea." Remus was different this morning. The shattered look had been replaced by something harder, something that reminded Harry that this was a man who'd fought in 2 wars and survived as a werewolf in a world that hated him. He sat at the table with a mug of coffee and a copy of the Horcrux research, and his eyes were clear and focused and angry in a way that Remus Lupin almost never allowed himself to be. "I've been thinking about Dumbledore's response to your letter," Remus said, addressing Harry. "Or rather, the lack of one." Harry nodded. He'd sent the letter 3 days ago. No reply. No owl, no Patronus message, no surprise appearance at the gates. Silence. "That worries me more than any response would have," Remus continued. "Dumbledore is not a man who goes quiet unless he's planning something. He's lost his Wisengamot seat, his headmastership, and his access to your funds. For a man who's operated from positions of institutional power for over a century, that's catastrophic. He'll be looking for leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Neville asked. "The kind you can't fight in a courtroom." Remus set down his coffee. "Harry, I knew Dumbledore for 20 years. I trusted him, more than I should have, clearly. But I know how he operates. When institutional power fails, he uses personal influence. He'll go to people you care about and offer them something they can't refuse. Information, protection, absolution. He'll frame himself as the only person who can solve a problem you don't know you have." "The Horcruxes," Hermione said, from behind a stack of notes so large it partially obscured her face. "He'll use his knowledge of the Horcruxes as leverage. He's spent years researching them, he probably knows things the goblins haven't found yet. Which is why I sent him the letter," Harry said. "The offer is genuine. If he comes to me honestly, I'll work with him. But I won't be manipulated into needing him." "He won't see the difference," Remus said gently. "Dumbledore has never been able to distinguish between cooperation and control. For him, working together means working under his direction. The idea that you could be an equal partner rather than a guided weapon, it doesn't fit his framework. Then he'll have to update his framework." Ron had been quiet through the exchange, working through a plate of eggs with mechanical focus, but now he looked up. "I talked to Dad last night." The table went still. Arthur Weasley's response to the revelations had been the one Harry had worried about most. The Weasley family's entanglement with the Order and with Dumbledore ran deep, and the discovery that 15 years of loyalty had been funded by stolen gold was the kind of truth that could break a family. "How is he?" Harry asked. "Gutted." Ron's voice was flat, controlled, in the way that meant he was holding something back by force. He read the evidence. All of it. Mum tried to argue at first, you know how she is about Dumbledore, but Dad showed her the numbers and the forged documents and the will, and she. He stopped. Swallowed. She cried for about 2 hours. Then she got angry. She's angry at Dumbledore, but she's also angry at herself for not seeing it, and she's angry at the world for being the kind of place where this can happen. "And your dad?" "Dad said to tell you he's sorry. Not for himself, he didn't know, but for being part of a system that let it happen. He said the Weasley family stands with you. And he said. Ron's voice wavered, just slightly. He said to tell you that you've always been family, and that hasn't changed, and he doesn't want you to think for a second that you owe us anything. Harry's throat was tight. Tell him I know. And tell him the Order's work was real, even if the funding was stolen. People were saved. That matters. Ron nodded, once, and went back to his eggs, and Hermione reached under the table and took his hand, and nobody mentioned it. They spent the morning on logistics. Harry divided the Horcrux hunt into 3 operations: Nocturne Alley, the Coastal Cave, and Hogwarts. Each required different preparation, different risks, different approaches. The Nocturne Alley target, based on the Goblin analysis, was most likely hidden in a shop or residence connected to one of the old Dark families. Griphook's team had narrowed the signature to a specific building, Borgin and Burke's, the dark artifacts dealer where Tom Riddle had worked as a young man. It made sense. Voldemort would have hidden a piece of his soul somewhere significant to his personal history. I can get into Borgin and Burke's, Daphne said, studying the intelligence file. The Greengrass family has done business there, reluctantly, and only for legal items, but Borgin knows my name. If I go in as a buyer, I can get eyes on the interior and identify likely hiding spots. Too dangerous on your own, Harry said. I wasn't planning on going alone. Neville and I can go together. Old Pureblood family's browsing dark artifacts is about as unremarkable as it gets in Nocturne Alley. We look, we locate, we report back. The actual retrieval can be planned properly. Harry looked at Neville, who shrugged. I've been in worse shops. Gran took me to Borgin and Burke's once when I was 12 to buy back a Longbottom family heirloom that had been misappropriated. It was educational. Fine. Reconnaissance only. No engagement, no heroics. That applies to you too, Daphne said pointedly. I'll be at Hogwarts. If anything goes wrong at Borgin and Burke's, use the emergency port key. Harry had commissioned a set of them from Gringotts, Goblin-made, keyed to Potter Manor's wards, capable of bypassing anti-port key wards that would block Ministry standard versions. Everyone on the team carried one. The cave, Hermione said, spreading a collection of notes across the table. I've been researching this. Dumbledore's travel records show he visited this location at least 3 times, and each time he purchased supplies consistent with curse-breaking, protective potions, countercharm matrices, even a set of goblin-forged cutting tools. Whatever's in there, it's heavily protected. The goblins can advise on the protections, Harry said. I'll take the cave myself, with Ron and Remus. Why not the full team? Ron asked. Because I want Hermione at Hogwarts. If there's a Horcrux hidden in the castle, finding it will require someone who understands the school's magical architecture better than anyone alive. Hermione's read Hogwarts, a history 14 times. 17, Hermione corrected, then flushed slightly. But yes. I can work with Professor McGonagall to scan the castle's ward network. If there's a foreign magical signature hidden in the school, the wards should be able to detect it. They're designed to identify threats. The problem is that nobody's ever thought to look for a Horcrux specifically, so the wards would have classified it as part of the ambient magic. Can you recalibrate them? With access to the headmistress's ward controls? Yes. It'll take time, but yes. Harry looked around the table. Every face was focused, determined, unafraid. 6 months ago, these people had been students and a teacher and a political hostess and a shopkeeper's daughter. Now they were a strike team, and they were better than anything Dumbledore had built in 20 years, because they were here by choice and they trusted each other completely. We move tomorrow, Harry said. All 3 operations, simultaneously. If Voldemort senses his Horcruxes are being threatened, he'll try to move them or protect them. Speed is everything. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Harry trained for 3 more hours in the training hall, pushing himself to the edge of his expanded capabilities, practicing combat magic that would have been impossible at 40% power. He worked on apparition, long range, precision, combat speed microjumps, until he could cross the length of the training hall in 3 successive apparitions so fast they looked like a single fluid movement. He practiced shield magic until his shields could absorb killing curses without cracking, a feat that was supposed to be impossible and that his magic accomplished with an almost casual sufficiency that would have terrified anyone watching. He wasn't showing off. He was being thorough. The cave would be dangerous, the protections ancient and malicious, and he intended to walk in prepared for anything. In the late afternoon, he took a break and found Daphne in the library. She was reading one of the Potter combat manuals, her feet tucked beneath her in an armchair, making notes in the margins with a self-inking quill. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression shifted, a softening that she covered quickly but not quite quickly enough. "You look tired," she said. "I've been training." "You train like you're preparing for the end of the world." "I might be." She closed the book and studied him. "Sit down, Harry." He sat across from her. The library was quiet, the late afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a beautiful room, and the war outside felt very far away. "Can I ask you something personal?" Daphne said. "You can ask." "I might not answer. When the ward came off, when you got your full power, what did it feel like?" Harry thought about it. Not the physical sensation, which he'd already described, but the emotional truth of it, the thing he hadn't told anyone. "Like grief," he said. "Not for what I'd lost, for what I'd never had. 16 years of being told I was average, ordinary, nothing special except for a scar and a prophecy. And the whole time, there was this." He gestured vaguely at himself. "This was underneath. All of it. And if I'd had it, if I'd grown up with my full power, in this house, with my family's knowledge, maybe things would have been different. Maybe Sirius would still be alive. Maybe I could have." "Don't," Daphne said, sharply enough to stop him. "Don't do that. You didn't have the information. You didn't have the power. You did everything anyone could have done with what you had, and more than most would have done with twice as much. What Dumbledore took from you is his crime, not your failure." Harry looked at her. She was leaning forward, her blue eyes bright and fierce, and there was a rawness in her voice that he hadn't heard before, a crack in the careful composure that she wore like armor. "Daphne Greengrass," he said. "Are you being nice to me?" "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." She sat back, composure restored, but the color in her cheeks betrayed her. "Don't let it go to your head. Too late." She threw the quill at him. He caught it out of the air without looking, reflexes enhanced by his full power and 3 days of combat training, and her eyebrows rose. "All right, that was impressive," she admitted. "I have my moments." They looked at each other for a beat longer than was strictly necessary, and then Daphne cleared her throat and opened her book again, and Harry stood and left the library with the self-inking quill still in his hand and something warm and complicated settling into the space behind his ribs. Evening brought an unexpected visitor. The wards chimed at 8 p.m., not the hostile alarm of an intruder but the neutral tone of someone requesting entry who carried no ill intent. Harry felt it from the kitchen, where the team was eating dinner, and he went to the front door with his wand in his hand and his magic coiled and ready. Albus Dumbledore stood at the gates of Potter Manor. He looked diminished. Not physically, he was still tall, still imposing, still radiating the quiet power of one of the most magically gifted wizards alive. But something had changed in the way he held himself. The performance was gone. The twinkling eyes, the benevolent smile, the carefully constructed persona of the wise mentor, all of it stripped away, and what remained was an old man in traveling robes, standing at a gate that wouldn't open for him, waiting. Harry walked down the path to the gate. He didn't open it. They stood on opposite sides of the iron bars, 5 feet apart, and looked at each other. "You received my letter," Harry said. I did. You didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. Dumbledore's voice was quiet, stripped of its usual oratorical cadence. That may be the first time in my life that's been true. You could have started with an apology. Would you have believed it? Probably not. But it would have been the right thing to do, and you're supposed to be the man who always does the right thing. Something passed across Dumbledore's face, a spasm of emotion that was there and gone so fast Harry almost missed it. Almost. May I come in? Dumbledore asked. Harry studied him for a long moment. Then he raised his hand and adjusted the wards, not opening the gate, but creating a narrow passage, just wide enough for one person, that would allow entry while maintaining the full defensive array. If Dumbledore tried anything, the wards would respond with lethal force. Dumbledore stepped through. He felt the wards press against him. Harry could see it in the way the old man's shoulders tightened, and then they settled, watchful and ready. "Walk with me," Harry said. They walked the grounds. Not toward the house. Harry wasn't ready to let Dumbledore see his team, his war room, his life, but along the edge of the valley, where the wards shimmered faintly in the evening air and the lights of the manor glowed warm behind them. For a while, neither spoke. The sky was vast and clear, stars emerging one by one, and the silence between them was heavy with everything that needed to be said and the difficulty of saying any of it. Dumbledore broke it first. "I will tell you about the Horcruxes," he said. "All of it. Everything I know. That's why I came. That's not the only reason." "No." Dumbledore stopped walking and turned to face Harry. In the starlight, his face was deeply lined, his eyes shadowed. He looked every one of his 115 years. "I came because you were right. About all of it. And because I have spent 3 days trying to construct an argument that justifies what I did, and I cannot." Harry waited. "The money, I told myself it was necessary. That the order needed funding and the Potter vaults were the most practical source. I told myself I would repay it when the war was won. But the truth is that I took it because I could, and because no one was watching, and because I had convinced myself so thoroughly that I was the wisest person in any room that the normal rules of conduct seemed, beneath the situation." He paused. "That's not justification. That's the pathology of arrogance, and I have spent my life confusing the two." Harry said nothing. He let Dumbledore talk. Not because he forgave him, forgiveness was a long way off, if it came at all, but because there was value in hearing the truth from the source, unvarnished and unperformed. "The suppression ward." Dumbledore's voice dropped. "This is the one I cannot excuse even to myself. I told the Wisingamot it was about preventing accidental magic in a Muggle household, and that was partially true. But the larger truth is that I was afraid of you." There it was. The thing Harry had suspected but never heard spoken aloud. "You were a child with power that rivaled adult wizards before you could walk. I watched you at 15 months old levitate your father's broomstick across the living room and set the curtains on fire simultaneously, and I thought, not consciously, not in words, but in the deep calculation that has governed my decisions for a century, I thought, this child will be uncontrollable. And I needed you to be controllable, because I needed you to play a specific role in a specific plan, and that plan required a brave, loyal, moderately powerful young man who would trust me absolutely and walk into death when I told him to." The words fell between them like stones. Harry felt them hit, not as surprise, because he'd worked this out days ago, but as confirmation. The final piece of the puzzle, heard from the man who'd built it. "You were going to send me to die," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore's voice cracked, the first genuine break Harry had ever heard in it. "The Horcrux in your scar, I discovered its nature when you were 11, after your first encounter with Voldemort at Hogwarts. I spent years trying to find another way. I consulted every source, explored every avenue. And I concluded, wrongly, as it turns out, that the fragment could only be destroyed by Voldemort himself. That you would need to let him kill you, and that in doing so, the Horcrux would be destroyed and you might, survive, if the conditions were right. The goblins removed it in 3 hours. I know. Dumbledore closed his eyes. I know. And that knowledge is going to haunt me for whatever years remain to me. Because it means that every sacrifice I made, every manipulation, every cruelty I inflicted on a child I told myself I loved, it was all unnecessary. There was always another way. I simply never looked for it, because looking would have meant admitting I didn't know everything, and I have never been capable of that admission. The silence stretched. Night insects chirped in the valley below. The wards hummed. Tell me about the Horcruxes, Harry said. Dumbledore opened his eyes, and there was something in them, relief, maybe, at the shift to actionable ground. There are 6. I've identified 5 of them with varying degrees of certainty. The diary, which you destroyed. The fragment in your scar, which the goblins have removed. A ring, which I recovered from the Gaunt family home and destroyed last year. He held up his right hand, and Harry saw for the first time that it was blackened and withered, dead-looking, a curse mark that spoke of dark magic barely survived. The ring's protections were formidable. I nearly died. What are the others? A locket belonging to Salazar Slytherin. I believe it's in a cave on the coast, a place significant to Voldemort's childhood. He would have hidden it with substantial protections. A cup belonging to Helga Hufflepuff, which I believe is in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. And a 5th object, I am less certain about this one, which I believe is an artifact connected to Rowena Ravenclaw, hidden at Hogwarts. The goblins detected 3 signatures, Harry said. Knockturn Alley, the cave, and Hogwarts. They didn't find anything at Gringotts. The Gringotts vaults have their own deep magic that would mask a Horcrux signature from external detection. And the Knockturn Alley signature. Dumbledore frowned. I wasn't aware of a Horcrux in Knockturn Alley. It's possible Voldemort created a 7th, a spare, if you will, beyond the original 6. Daphne suggested he'd aim for 7 soul pieces total. 6 Horcruxes plus his main soul. Miss Greengrass. Yes, I've heard she's become involved. Something flickered across Dumbledore's face. She's correct. 7 is the number Voldemort would choose. Which means the Knockturn Alley object is the 6th Horcrux, not a spare. I miscounted. He said this last part with a tone of mild wonder, as though miscounting was a novel experience. The Ravenclaw artifact and the Knockturn Alley object, that's 2 I failed to identify correctly. Your team has already surpassed my research. We had better resources. You had better judgment. There is a difference. Dumbledore looked at him, and the old man's expression was something Harry had never seen before, not performed, not calculated, just, open. Bare. A man standing in front of the consequences of a lifetime of choices and choosing not to look away. Harry. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot give you back your childhood or your parents' wishes or the years of your own power. I can only tell you the truth and offer what I have left. My knowledge. My magic. My willingness to fight beside you, as an equal, without conditions. Without manipulation. Without manipulation. Without schemes or contingency plans or of greater good calculations that sacrifice other people's lives. Without any of those things. And if I catch you doing it anyway? Then I will deserve whatever consequence you choose. Harry looked at him for a long time. The old man standing before him was not the Dumbledore he'd known, the twinkling grandfather, the infallible leader, the chess master who moved people like pieces. That man had been dismantled, publicly and privately, and what remained was someone more human and therefore more dangerous and therefore, paradoxically, more trustworthy. A Dumbledore who admitted his mistakes was a Dumbledore who might not repeat them. Might. You can help, Harry said. The cave, you've been there. You know the protections. You'll come with me tomorrow, and you'll tell me everything before we go in. No surprises, no withholding. If I think for a moment that you're holding back, you won't have cause to. We'll see. Harry turned back toward the house. You can stay tonight. Guest room, ground floor. I'll introduce you to the team in the morning, and if anyone on my team objects to your presence, you leave. Their trust matters more to me than your knowledge. Dumbledore nodded. That is fair. And Dumbledore. Harry stopped. The money. All of it. Returned. With interest. The personal vault funds will be returned immediately. The order expenditures and political funds, I will need to liquidate assets, but it will be done. You have my word. I have your word and the Wisengamot's judgment and the Goblin Nation's enforcement. The word is the least of it. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, more like the memory of what smiling used to feel like, crossed Dumbledore's face. You have become formidable, Harry. I always was. You just made sure I couldn't show it. They walked back to the manor in silence, and if Dumbledore felt the weight of that silence, he bore it without complaint. The morning of August 5th was clear and bright and electric with purpose. Harry brought Dumbledore to breakfast. The reaction was about what he'd expected. Ron went rigid, his hand closing around his fork like a weapon. Hermione's face cycled through 6 emotions in 3 seconds. Neville's expression went flat and hard. Remus stood up slowly, his chair scraping back, and looked at Dumbledore with the eyes of a man who'd spent 20 years trusting someone and had 3 days to process the betrayal. Daphne was the only one who didn't react visibly. She sipped her tea, studied Dumbledore over the rim of her cup, and waited. Before anyone says anything, Harry said, I want to explain why he's here. He laid it out, the Horcrux information, the cave expertise, the conditional terms of cooperation. He was transparent about everything, including his own uncertainty, because this team ran on trust and he refused to undermine it. I don't forgive him, Harry said plainly, standing at the head of the table with Dumbledore seated at the far end like a man in a dock. I may never forgive him. But he has knowledge we need, and he's offered to share it without conditions. I've accepted that offer. If anyone here is uncomfortable with his presence, he leaves. No questions, no judgment. Silence. Then Remus spoke. Albus. His voice was controlled, but something raw moved underneath it. Look at me. Dumbledore looked. I trusted you with everything, Remus said. My life, my friends' lives, my best friend's son. And you used that trust to steal from a child, to suppress his power, to plan his death. I don't care about your reasons. I don't care about the greater good. I care that you looked me in the eye for 15 years and lied, and I never saw it. I know, Dumbledore said. And I am sorry, Remus. That is inadequate. But it is true. Remus held his gaze for a long moment. Then, stay. Help us end this. But if you put Harry in danger, if you put any of them in danger, I will kill you myself, and the wolf will enjoy it. The words were delivered with perfect calm, and Harry had absolutely no doubt that Remus meant every syllable. Noted, Dumbledore said quietly. The others gave their assent, Ron with a curt nod, Hermione with a tight-lipped, fine, Neville with a silence that spoke volumes. Daphne simply said, I have questions about the cave protections. You'll answer them over breakfast, and slid a plate of toast toward Dumbledore with the air of someone who had decided to be practical about the apocalypse. They planned over eggs and bacon. 3 operations, simultaneous, launching at noon. Team 1, Neville and Daphne to Nocturne Alley. Reconnaissance had been upgraded to active retrieval, the Goblin analysis had pinpointed the Horcrux to a specific cabinet in Borgin and Berks, and Griphook had provided a containment vessel that would safely hold the object for transport. Get in, get the Horcrux, get out. Team 2, Harry, Dumbledore, Ron, and Remus to the coastal cave. Dumbledore's briefing on the protections was extensive and grim, an enchanted lake, an army of inferi, a potion that had to be drunk to access the Horcrux. Harry listened to the description of the potion, a liquid that caused agonizing thirst and forced the drinker to relive their worst memories, and made a decision. "Nobody's drinking that potion," he said flatly. "Harry, the basin can only be emptied by a living person drinking its contents." "I heard you. And I'm telling you, nobody on my team is going to be subjected to magical torture to retrieve an object. There's another way. I spent months researching that cave. There is no other way. The basin is enchanted to resist vanishing, siphoning, and physical removal. Only consumption, Dumbledore." Harry's voice was quiet, and the air in the kitchen thickened with his magic, pressing outward, making the candles flare and the silverware rattle. "You spent months researching at 40% of my power level. Things that are impossible for most wizards are not necessarily impossible for me. I'll handle the basin." Dumbledore opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time in the conversation, looked genuinely uncertain. "What are you planning?" "You'll see when we get there." Team 3, Hermione at Hogwarts with McGonagall, recalibrating the ward network to detect the Ravenclaw Horcrux. This was the longest operation. Hermione estimated it would take 6 to 8 hours to modify the ward detection parameters. She'd be protected by the castle's own defenses and by McGonagall, who, in Harry's experience, was worth about 5 aurors when she was angry. "The Gringotts vault," Ron said. "The Hufflepuff cup. What about that one?" "Griphook is handling it," Harry said. "Internally. As a matter of goblin honor, the presence of a Horcrux in a Gringotts vault is an offense against the bank itself. Director Ragnarok has authorized a retrieval operation conducted entirely by goblin forces. They'll breach the Lestrange vault, extract the cup, and contain it. They don't want wizard help. They want to clean their own house." Ron blinked. "Remind me never to offend the goblins. That's good general life advice." By 11 a.m., everyone was ready. Harry stood in the entrance hall of Potter Manor, feeling the hum of the wards and the steady pulse of the rings on his hand, and watched his team prepare. Neville and Daphne were by the door, dressed in dark, practical clothes, their wands holstered, the goblin containment vessel shrunken in Daphne's pocket. Neville looked calm and focused. Daphne looked like she was looking forward to it. "Be careful," Harry told them. "Be careful yourself," Daphne said, and then, impulsively, she stepped forward and kissed him on the cheek, quick, light, barely a brush of contact, and stepped back with an expression that dared him to comment. "For luck," she said. "I thought you didn't believe in luck." "I don't. That was for me." She turned and walked out the door with Neville, and Harry stood there for a moment with his hand on his cheek and Ron making a strangled noise behind him that might have been a laugh or might have been a coronary event. "Not a word, Ron. Wasn't going to say a thing, mate. Except that you're bright red. Not a word." Ron grinned, the first real grin Harry had seen from him in days, and it was so familiar, so fundamentally Ron, that Harry felt the last knot of tension in his chest unwind. Whatever else happened today, he had his best friend at his side, and that was worth more than all the gold in Gringotts. Hermione left for Hogwarts via Floo, clutching a briefcase of research notes and wearing an expression of determined intensity that Harry recognized from every exam season since first year. McGonagall was expecting her. The castle's wards would be open to her specifically, keyed by the acting headmistress. "Be safe," Harry told her. "You too. And Harry, destroy them. All of them. End this." "I intend to." She hugged him fiercely, hugged Ron longer, and stepped into the green flames and was gone. The cave was on the coast of Devon, accessible only by sea, hidden in a cliff face that showed nothing but rock to Muggle eyes. Harry, Dumbledore, Ron, and Remus apparat to the nearest point on the cliff top and looked down at the churning water below. "The entrance is underwater," Dumbledore said. "A swim through a tunnel in the rock, perhaps 50 feet, and then a rise into an interior cave. The cave itself is vast, an underground lake, an island in the center, and on the island, the basin containing the Horcrux." "Inferi in the lake," Harry said. How many? Hundreds. Possibly thousands. They respond to contact with the water and to the removal of the Horcrux from the basin. Fire? The most effective weapon against them, yes. Harry looked at his team. Ron was pale but steady, his wand in his hand, his jaw set. Remus was calm with the practiced calm of a veteran, already casting diagnostic charms on the cliff face. Here's how we do this, Harry said. I go first. I handle the protections, the basin, and the inferi. Ron and Remus, you're my flank, you keep anything off my back that gets past my primary response. Dumbledore, you provide intelligence. You've been here before, you know where the traps are. Call them out as we go. You're taking point. Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that might have been concern and might have been professional assessment. I'm the most powerful person here. If something goes wrong, I'm the one most likely to survive it. Point makes sense. Harry stripped off his outer robe and rolled up his sleeves. Let's go. The swim was brutal, cold, dark, the tunnel pressing close around them, the water tasting of salt and old magic. Harry cast a bubblehead charm on all four of them and led the way, his wand lit, the rock walls sliding past inches from his shoulders. The tunnel twisted and dove and then rose, and they broke the surface in a cavern so vast that Harry's lumos barely reached the ceiling. The lake spread before them, black and still as glass, and in its center, barely visible, the dim glow of the island and the basin. The boat, Dumbledore said, pointing to a section of the shoreline. There's an enchanted boat, invisible, chained here. It will carry one wizard across, perhaps two, if one is young. The enchantment measures magical weight, not physical weight. Forget the boat, Harry said. He raised his wand and cast, not a specific spell but a shaped expression of pure will, the flash-casting technique he'd been practicing for days. A bridge of solid light materialized across the lake's surface, arcing from shore to island, bright enough to illuminate the entire cavern. Beneath the bridge, in the suddenly lit water, shapes were visible, dozens, hundreds, the pale bloated forms of inferi drifting in the depths, their dead eyes reflecting the light. Ron made a sound in his throat. Remus's hand tightened on his wand. Walk fast, Harry said, and stepped onto the bridge. They crossed in seconds, the bridge solid beneath their feet, the inferi stirring below but not attacking. The light seemed to hold them at bay, or perhaps it was the sheer force of Harry's magic radiating through the construct. They reached the island, a small rocky platform barely 10 feet across, and in its center stood the basin. It was a stone bowl, waist-height, filled with a glowing green potion that cast sickly light across their faces. In the depths of the liquid, Harry could see something, a glint of gold, a chain, a locket. The potion cannot be removed by any means except drinking, Dumbledore said, his voice tight. I've verified this. The basin is enchanted to resist every form of magical extraction I know. You don't know what I know, Harry said. He placed both hands on the rim of the basin and closed his eyes. The potion's enchantment pressed against his senses, old, malicious, designed by a genius of dark magic to be impervious. And for most wizards, it would be. Most wizards couldn't do what Harry was about to attempt, because most wizards operated within the framework of spells, words, wand movements, established magical theory. Harry had spent the last week learning that his magic didn't need a framework. It needed intent. He reached into the basin with his magic, not his hands, not his wand, but the raw force of his will, shaped and directed with the precision he'd spent days developing. He felt the enchantment resist. It was like pushing against a wall of iron. But Harry pushed harder, and the wall bent, and he pushed harder still, and it cracked, and with a final surge of power that made the air in the cavern scream and the lake churn and the inferi shriek beneath the water, the enchantment shattered. The green potion evaporated in an instant, boiling away into nothing, and the locket lay exposed in the empty basin, a heavy gold oval on a thick chain, radiating malice like heat from an open flame. Harry picked it up with a gloved hand and dropped it into the goblin containment vessel. The vessel sealed, the runes on its surface flaring, and the Horcrux's presence vanished from his senses like a door slamming shut. The Inferi attacked. They came from everywhere at once, erupting from the lake in a wave of grey, waterlogged bodies, hundreds of them, climbing over each other in their mindless hunger to reach the island. The water churned white with their rising, and the stench hit like a physical force, and Ron shouted and Remus cast and Dumbledore raised his wand, Harry raised his hand. The fire that poured from his palm was not fiend fire, he had too much control for that. It was something else, something closer to what he'd conjured in the training hall, pure magical flame, white-hot, shaped by his will into a sphere that expanded outward from the island in every direction simultaneously. It rolled across the lake like a sunrise, and every Inferius it touched simply ceased, not burned, not destroyed, but unmade, the dark animation that sustained them overwhelmed by a force so much greater that they had no capacity to resist. The fire swept the lake clean in 4 seconds. When it faded, the water was still and empty, and wisps of steam curled from the surface, and the cavern was silent. Ron was staring at Harry with an expression of stunned, open-mouthed awe. Remus had lowered his wand and was breathing hard, not from exertion but from the sheer proximity to that much power. And Dumbledore was looking at Harry with an expression that combined wonder and grief in equal measure, the look of a man who'd finally understood exactly how much he'd suppressed. "That," Dumbledore said softly, "is what you were always meant to be." "No," Harry said. "This is what I am. What I was meant to be was someone you could control. The difference matters." They left the cave in silence, crossing the empty lake on Harry's bridge of light. The locket was secure. One more Horcrux down. The report from Nocturne Alley came through the communication mirrors Hermione had enchanted, paired mirrors that allowed instant visual and audio contact, a significant improvement over the Fleur network. Neville's face appeared in Harry's mirror as they apparat back to the cliff top. He was grinning, actually grinning, an expression Harry associated more with the Weasley twins than with Neville Longbottom. "Got it," Neville said. "A diadem. Ravenclaw's diadem." It was in a vanishing cabinet in the back of Borgin's shop, behind about 15 layers of dark wards. Daphne talked Borgin into showing us his premium collection, and I identified the cabinet by its magical signature. The retrieval was clean. Daphne handled the wards, she's scarily good at curse-breaking, by the way, and I contained the Horcrux. "We're back at Potter Manor. Any trouble?" Borgin tried to object when we opened the cabinet. Daphne petrified him. She was very polite about it. Harry laughed. "Injuries?" "None. Not a scratch. Although Daphne says if you ask her whether she was worried, she'll hex you." "Noted. We're incoming with the locket. Is there word from Hermione?" 20 minutes ago. She and McGonagall found something. She didn't give details, but she sounded excited. She said to tell you to come to Hogwarts as soon as you can." Harry looked at his team. Ron nodded. Remus nodded. Even Dumbledore nodded. "On our way," Harry said, and closed the mirror. Hogwarts was golden in the late afternoon light, the castle's towers and turrets catching the sun, and Harry felt a complicated surge of emotion as he approached the gates. This place had been his first home, the first place he'd ever belonged, ever been wanted. And it had also been a cage, a controlled environment where Dumbledore had shaped his experiences and managed his growth and pointed him toward a death he was supposed to accept willingly. He loved it. He was furious at it. Both things were true. McGonagall met them at the entrance hall. She looked tired but electrified, the way she looked during particularly intense Quidditch matches, and she gripped Harry's hand with both of hers. "Lord Potter," she said. "I believe we found your Horcrux. But there's something else you need to see." She led them to the 7th floor. To a stretch of blank wall that Harry recognized, the Room of Requirement. But the room that materialized when they entered was not the DA's training space or the Room of Hidden Things. It was a small, austere chamber with stone walls and a single pedestal in the center, and on the pedestal sat a tiara of silver and sapphires, beautiful and terrible, pulsing with dark magic that Harry could feel from the doorway. Ravenclaw's diadem, Hermione said, from beside the pedestal. She was pale and her hair was wilder than usual, but her eyes were bright with the particular fire of intellectual triumph. It's been here the whole time. When I recalibrated the wards, they identified it immediately. It was hidden in the room of requirement's pocket dimension, shielded from normal detection. But the wards could find it once they knew what to look for. You said there was something else, Harry said. McGonagall stepped forward. When we recalibrated the wards, they detected a second anomaly. Not a Horcrux, something older. A set of enchantments woven into the castle's foundation stones, placed approximately 15 years ago, designed to monitor the magical development of a specific student and report to a specific individual. Her lips were thin as a blade. The enchantments were keyed to your magical signature, Lord Potter. And the reports were sent to Albus Dumbledore. Harry turned to Dumbledore, who was standing in the doorway. The old man's face was grey. You bugged me, Harry said. You put surveillance enchantments on the castle to monitor me. I needed to track the development of the Horcrux in your scar. To know if it was growing, if Voldemort's influence was, you could have told me. You could have explained. You could have done literally anything other than spy on a child through the walls of his school. Harry's magic pressed outward, and the stones of the room of requirement groaned. He reined it in with effort. McGonagall, remove them. Already done, McGonagall said, with a look at Dumbledore that could have frozen fire. Harry turned back to the diadem. He drew his wand, pointed it at the pedestal, and looked at Dumbledore. How did you destroy the ring? The sword of Gryffindor. It's impregnated with basilisk venom from your encounter in the Chamber of Secrets, one of the few substances that can destroy a Horcrux. Where is the sword? In the headmistress's office, McGonagall said. I'll get it. She returned in minutes with the ruby-hilted sword gleaming in her hands. She offered it to Harry, and when he gripped it, the blade sang, a clear, high note that filled the room, and the rubies blazed with light. The sword recognized him. Of course it did. It had come to him in the Chamber of Secrets when he was 12 and desperate and brave enough to deserve it. Harry raised the sword over the diadem. The Horcrux sensed the threat, the sapphires blazed with black light and a voice shrieked from the tiara, Tom Riddle's voice, high and cold and desperate, you cannot destroy me. I am Lord Voldemort. I am eternal. I am, the sword came down. The diadem split cleanly in two, and a column of black smoke erupted from the halves with a scream that shook the walls, and then it was over. The smoke dissipated. The scream faded. The two halves of the diadem lay on the pedestal, inert and dead, and the room was quiet. For down. The cup at Gringotts and the locket in his pocket made 6, if the goblins had succeeded. And then, his mirror vibrated. He pulled it out. Griphook's face, sharp and triumphant. The cup is destroyed, Lord Potter. Director Ragnarok sends his regards and informs you that the Lestrange Vault has been reorganized. 6 Horcruxes. All accounted for. All destroyed or contained. Harry looked at the broken diadem, at the sword in his hand, at the faces of the people around him, Hermione, brilliant and fierce, Ron, loyal and brave, Remus, scarred and strong, McGonagall, iron-willed and righteous, Dumbledore, diminished and trying to be worthy of the chance he'd been given. We need to destroy the remaining contained Horcruxes tonight, Harry said. And then we need to find Voldemort. Because once he realizes his anchors are gone, he's going to do something desperate, and I'd rather meet him on my terms than his. They returned to Potter Manor at sunset. Neville and Daphne were waiting, and the diadem, the Nocturne Alley one, was brought out alongside the locket from the cave. Harry destroyed both with the sword of Gryffindor in the training hall, 2 clean strokes, 2 screaming columns of black smoke that thrashed and died. The goblin contained soul fragments from his scar and the Gringotts cup had already been destroyed by goblin methods. 6 Horcruxes. Gone. Every anchor Voldemort had created to tether himself to immortality, unmade in a single day by a team of people who trusted each other and a 16-year-old who'd been underestimated his entire life. Harry stood in the training hall with the sword in his hand and looked at his team and felt something that was neither triumph nor relief but a quiet, steady readiness. The Horcruxes were gone. Voldemort was mortal. Now came the hard part. He'll feel it, Dumbledore said from the edge of the room. The destruction of his Horcruxes. He'll know. And he'll come. Good, Harry said. Let him. Daphne found him on the terrace after midnight. The others were asleep, or trying to be, the adrenaline of the day still buzzing in everyone's veins. Harry was standing at the railing, looking out over the valley, the Welsh darkness vast and star-filled around him. His magic was quiet for once, settled into him like a banked fire, and the rings on his hand glowed softly in the dark. She came to stand beside him without speaking, and for a while they just stood there, two people at the edge of something enormous, watching the stars. "I'm scared," she said. Harry looked at her. It was the first time she'd ever said anything like that, the first crack in the armor that wasn't immediately sealed and denied. Of Voldemort? Of losing this? She gestured at the manor, the valley, the lit windows behind them where their friends slept. "A week ago, I was Daphne Greengrass, neutral family daughter, playing politics and keeping my head down. Now I have this. People I care about. A fight that matters. Something that feels like it could be a life, instead of just a strategy." She looked at him, and her eyes were bright in the starlight. "I've never had anything worth being afraid of losing before." Harry reached over and took her hand. She let him. Her fingers were cold, and they tightened around his. "I'm not going to let anything happen to them," he said. "To any of you. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll die trying. That's exactly what I'm afraid of." She turned to face him, and they were very close, and the air between them was charged with something that had nothing to do with magic. "Don't die, Harry. Don't you dare. I didn't go through all this, the politics and the danger and falling for a Gryffindor, of all the humiliating things, just to lose you to a snake-faced lunatic." Harry stared at her. "Did you just say, 'Don't make it weird'?" "You said, 'falling for,' I said don't make it weird, Potter." He kissed her. Or she kissed him. Later, neither of them would be able to agree on who moved first, and it didn't matter, because the result was the same, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist, the taste of tea and starlight and the sharp, clean electricity of two people who'd been circling each other for days finally colliding. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and certain and slightly desperate, and when they broke apart, they were both breathing hard and Daphne's composure was in ruins and Harry's magic had made every window in Potter Manor glow bright gold. "Well," Daphne said, slightly dazed. "That was, yeah. We should probably, yeah. Stop saying, yeah. Okay. How about, I've wanted to do that since you threw a quill at me in the library. That was 2 days ago. It's been a long 2 days." She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and bright, and Harry held her and felt the warmth of it against his chest and thought, This is what I'm fighting for. Not destiny, not prophecy, not the greater good. This. They stayed on the terrace until the stars began to fade and the eastern sky turned pale, talking about everything and nothing, their families, their fears, the absurdity of their situation, the future they might have if they survived the next few days. And when the first light of dawn touched the valley, they went inside together, and Harry felt ready for whatever came next. Voldemort came the next day. Not to Potter Manor, the wards would have shredded any assault force. He came to Hogsmeade, with every Death Eater he had left, and he burned the village to announce his arrival. The message was simple, delivered via a dark mark blazing in the sky above the smoking ruins: "Come and face me, Harry Potter. Or I will burn everything you love until there is nothing left." Harry received the news via Patronus from McGonagall, silver cat, tight-voiced, clipped. Voldemort's forces were massing on the border of Hogwarts wards. The castle was being evacuated. Aurors were en route. The Order, leaderless, fragmented, but still willing to fight, was scrambling. Harry stood in the war room of Potter Manor, surrounded by his team, and looked at the map where a massive cluster of red pulsed against the Hogwarts boundary. "He's mortal now," Harry said. "No Horcruxes. No anchors. One life, just like anyone else." He looked around the room. "I'm going." "You don't have to." "Shut up, Harry," Ron said. What he said, Neville agreed. "If you think I'm missing this," Daphne said, "you're delusional." Hermione just stood up and started packing her beaded bag with potions, medical supplies, and every defensive artifact she could reach. Remus smiled, and in his smile was the wolf and the man and the last of the marauders. "James and Lily and Sirius would never forgive me if I let you go alone." Even Dumbledore stood, his blackened hand at his side, his wand in the other. "I have a great deal to atone for. This seems like a reasonable place to start." They apparat to the edge of Hogwarts wards, 7 of them, arriving in a line on the hilltop overlooking the castle. Below them, the grounds were a maelstrom. Death Eaters had breached the outer wards and were fighting their way toward the castle. Giants strode among them, smashing walls. Dementors circled overhead like vultures. And standing at the center of it all, his red eyes blazing, his white face lifted to the sky, was Lord Voldemort. Harry felt his scar twinge, just a twinge, the ghost of a connection that no longer existed, and smiled. Voldemort couldn't feel him anymore. Couldn't read his emotions, couldn't send him visions, couldn't poison his dreams. The soul fragment was gone, and Voldemort didn't know it. "Ron, Remus, Dumbledore, take the west flank. Push the Death Eaters away from the castle entrance. Hermione, get to the hospital wing and set up triage. Neville, the giants. You know what to do." Neville cracked his knuckles. Over the past few days, Harry had taught him a few things from the Potter combat manuals, and Neville had taken to battle magic with a ferocity that surprised everyone except Harry. "Daphne, I'm with you." He looked at her. She looked back, her wand in her hand, her chin high, utterly immovable. "Together, then," he said. They went down the hill like a breaking wave. Harry didn't hide his power. There was no reason to, not anymore, not here, at the end of things. He walked onto the battlefield and his magic rolled out ahead of him like a tide, and every curse that flew toward him shattered against his shields, and every Death Eater who turned to face him met a force they were not remotely prepared for. He fought through them without slowing. Chain casting, flash casting, wandless magic, apparition, everything he'd learned in a week of training at full power, unleashed without restraint. Death Eaters fell like leaves. Stunned, bound, disarmed, hurled aside, he didn't kill, because he didn't need to, because killing was the easy thing and Harry Potter had never been interested in easy. Daphne fought beside him, and she was brilliant, not his equal in raw power, no one was, but precise and creative and ruthless in a way that complemented his overwhelming force. Where Harry was a battering ram, she was a scalpel, picking off threats he didn't see, warding his blind spots, turning enemy curses back on their casters with elegant redirections. They moved together like they'd been fighting together for years, a synchronization born of mutual trust and compatible instincts. Across the field, the others were doing their work. Ron and Remus and Dumbledore hit the west flank like a hammer, Ron's raw courage combining with Remus's experience and Dumbledore's vast knowledge to create a combined force that drove the Death Eaters back from the castle entrance in minutes. Neville reached the giants and did something with a combination of herbology magic and combat spells that Harry had never seen before. Massive vines erupted from the earth, wrapping around the giants' legs, pulling them down, and Neville stood beneath them looking small and fearless and absolutely magnificent. And then Harry reached the center of the field, and Voldemort was there, and everything else fell away. "Tom," Harry said. Voldemort turned. His red eyes found Harry's, and something passed between them, not the old connection, not the Horcrux link, but something simpler and older. Recognition. The killer and the survivor. The beginning and the end. "You have been busy, Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice was a cold hiss that carried across the battlefield. "My Horcruxes. All of them. I felt them die, one by one, like fingers being severed." "Good. Then you know what this is. This is where you die." "This is where one of us dies," Harry agreed. "And it won't be me." Voldemort struck first, a killing curse, green and burning, launched with the speed and savagery that had made him the most feared dark wizard in a century. Harry didn't dodge. He raised his left hand, wandless, and caught the curse on a shield of pure white light that blazed like a sun and held without cracking. Voldemort's eyes widened. "The suppression ward," Harry said. "Dumbledore put it on me when I was a baby. It's gone now. Want to see what that means?" He attacked. Not with a single spell but with a storm, chain-cast sequences of 10, 15, 20 spells launched in the space of seconds, each one feeding the next, the whole barrage driven by a magical core that was among the most powerful born in centuries and had been freed from its cage barely a week ago. The air between them became a wall of light, red, gold, white, blue, and Voldemort had to shield, had to dodge, had to retreat, and the shock on his face was the most satisfying thing Harry had ever seen. They dueled across the battlefield in a running fight that tore up the ground beneath them and set the air on fire. Voldemort was brilliant, there was no denying it, no pretending otherwise. His spell knowledge was vast, his creativity was lethal, and his willingness to use dark magic that would have killed a less powerful wizard was limitless. He threw curses Harry had never heard of, summoned creatures of shadow, tore the earth open, called lightning from the sky. Harry met everything. Every curse, every creature, every apocalyptic display of dark magic, he met them with power that was not dark and was not light but was simply his, vast and bright and forged in a crucible of loss and love and the furious, unstoppable will of a boy who'd been told his whole life that he wasn't enough and had decided, finally and forever, that he was. The duel's climax came not with a dramatic final exchange but with a moment of stillness. They stood 20 feet apart, both breathing hard for the first time, the battlefield around them devastated, and Voldemort looked at Harry and understood. "The prophecy," Voldemort whispered. "The power the Dark Lord knows not." "It was never a weapon," Harry said. "It was never a spell or a technique or a secret. The power you don't know is the ability to love and be loved and let that make you stronger instead of weaker. It's the ability to trust people, to fight beside them instead of above them, to build something worth protecting instead of something worth fearing." "Sentiment," Voldemort hissed. "Weakness." "Yeah," Harry said. "That's what you'd think." He raised his wand. The holly and phoenix feather sang in his grip, resonating with his core, and Harry poured everything into the spell, not a killing curse, not an unforgivable, but a disarming charm. The simplest, purest expression of magical will. The first spell he'd ever dueled with. Expelliarmus. The red light that erupted from his wand was nothing like a normal disarming charm. It was a beam of solid power that crossed the distance between them in an instant, and when it hit Voldemort's shield, it didn't bounce or shatter or deflect. It went through. Through the shield, through the dark protections, through a century of accumulated dark magic and stolen power, and it hit Tom Riddle in the chest with the full force of Harry Potter's unbound, unrestricted, undeniable magic. The wand flew from Voldemort's hand and arced through the air, and Harry caught it left-handed. And Tom Riddle, mortal, wandless, his Horcruxes gone and his army falling, stood on the broken field and looked at Harry with an expression of pure, uncomprehending terror. "How?" Voldemort breathed. "Because you never understood what made me dangerous," Harry said. "It was never the prophecy. It was never the scar. It was that I had people who loved me, and you didn't, and that gap was always going to be wider than any amount of dark magic could bridge." He raised both wands, holly in his right hand, yew in his left, and cast a binding spell with both simultaneously, a cage of interlocked magic so dense and powerful that it shone like solid gold. It wrapped around Voldemort like chains, forcing him to his knees, pinning him to the earth, and the dark wizard screamed, not in pain but in rage, the impotent fury of a man who'd spent his entire life building power and had lost it all in an afternoon. Around them, the battlefield was falling silent. Death Eaters were surrendering, the giants had fallen, the Dementors were scattering before a dozen patron uses cast by Aurors and Order members and students who'd stayed to fight. The battle was over. Harry stood over the bound form of Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard in the world, and felt exhausted and triumphant and sad all at once. Daphne reached him first. She crossed the torn-up field at a run, her hair wild, a cut on her cheekbone, and she stopped 3 feet away and looked at Voldemort and then at Harry and then at Voldemort again. "You used Expelliarmus," she said. "It worked. You ended the darkest wizard in a century with a disarming charm. It's a good spell." She stared at him. And then she laughed, bright and sharp and incredulous, and threw her arms around his neck, and Harry held her and buried his face in her hair and let himself breathe for what felt like the first time in years. The others came. Ron, limping but grinning, with a bruise the size of a fist on his jaw and a fierce pride in his eyes. Hermione, tear-streaked and blood-smeared from the hospital wing, clutching Harry with a ferocity that left him gasping. Neville, covered head to toe in mud and plant matter, grinning like a madman. Remus, grey-faced and shaking but alive, so alive, his hand gripping Harry's shoulder hard enough to bruise. And Dumbledore, standing at the edge of the group, his blackened hand hanging at his side, looking at Harry with an expression that contained multitudes, pride and sorrow and something that, despite everything, looked very much like love. Harry met his eyes. The moment stretched. "It's over," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "It is." Voldemort was taken into Ministry custody under maximum security, bound by goblin chains, stripped of magic by unspeakable grade suppression wards, and guarded by a combined force of Aurors and goblin warriors. There would be a trial. There would be justice. Harry insisted on it. No Azkaban without due process, no execution without judgment, no shortcuts. If the wizarding world was going to move forward, it would do so by the rule of law. The weeks that followed were a hurricane of activity. The Wizengamot reforms that Harry had set in motion before the battle continued, Dumbledore's theft was fully adjudicated, the stolen funds returned with interest and penalties, the neutral families compensated. Dumbledore himself cooperated fully, liquidating personal assets and turning over records with a meticulous thoroughness that spoke of genuine contrition. He was not imprisoned, Harry argued against it, surprising everyone, but he was stripped of every title, every position, every institutional role he'd held. Albus Dumbledore became, for the first time in a century, a private citizen. The goblins received a formal apology from the Wizengamot, the first in goblin wizard history, along with a renegotiation of banking treaties that gave them greater autonomy and recognition. Ragnarok accepted the apology with a nod that, for a goblin, was equivalent to a standing ovation. McGonagall became permanent headmistress of Hogwarts, and her first act was to hire Remus Lupin as the permanent defense against the dark arts professor, with a full supply of Wolfsbane potion funded by the Potter estate. Her second act was to establish the Lily and James Potter Scholarship for Muggle-born students, also funded by Harry. Her third act was to ban lemon drops from the headmistress's office, which drew a genuine laugh from Harry when he heard about it. Harry returned to Potter Manor on a September evening, after weeks of trials and reforms and rebuilding, and stood in the entrance hall and let the wards wash over him and felt, finally, that the word home meant something real. He found Daphne in the library. She'd all but moved in, though neither of them had formally acknowledged this, with her feet tucked under her and a book in her lap and a cup of tea going cold on the side table. She looked up when he came in, and her smile was the small, private one that she only gave him, and Harry felt his heart turn over in his chest. "How was the Wizengamot?" she asked. "Boring. Effective. Neville gave a speech about goblin rights that made Augusta cry, though she'll deny it under oath. Good. Come sit down. You look like you haven't slept in 3 days. I haven't. I know. That's why I said it. She pulled him down beside her and he went willingly, settling into the chair that was really too small for 2 people and was therefore exactly the right size. She curled against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they sat in the library of Potter Manor as the evening light faded and the wards hummed their eternal song. Harry, Daphne said after a while. What are you going to do now? He thought about it. For the first time in his life, the answer wasn't dictated by a prophecy or a war or a manipulator's plan. It was his. Just his. I'm going to finish school, he said. Take my newts. Maybe study warding with the goblins. Ragnarok offered an apprenticeship, which I think might be the first time a goblin's offered that to a wizard. I'm going to use the Wisengamot seats to push for real reform, not just goblin rights, but muggleborn integration, magical creature protections, an overhaul of the judicial system. I'm going to find every family that Dumbledore hurt and make it right. That's a lot. I have time. And resources. And very good people helping me. Flattery. Observation. She smiled against his shoulder. And us? What about us? Harry pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I think we're doing fine. You've taken over my library, my kitchen, and my strategic planning. At this rate, you'll have annexed the whole manor by Christmas. I was thinking more like October. He laughed, and she laughed, and the sound of it filled the library and drifted through the open windows into the Welsh evening, where the valley was green and the sky was streaked with gold and the wards of Potter Manor sang their steady, protective song, welcoming their lord home. In the entrance hall, the portrait of Charles Potter smiled and turned to the portrait of his wife and said, I think the boy's going to be all right. In the master study, a letter from James Potter sat in the inner pocket of a jacket draped over a chair, its words as warm and alive as the day they were written, we are so proud of you, whatever you've become. And in the deepest vault of Gringotts, in a ledger bound in gold and marked with 3 house crests, the final line of the Potter-Black-Peverell account read, balance restored. All debt settled. Legacy secured. The rings on Harry's hand pulsed once, gold, silver, white, and were still.